Please don't forget subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified of new daily videos.
The fluorescent hum of room 207 was a dull counterpoint to the vibrant, yet controlled, energy of Evelyn Finch. Miss Finch, as she was known within these hallowed, slightly peeling walls, stood before a whiteboard scrawled with the intricacies of Elizabethan verse, a laser pointer held like a rapier in her slender hand. Her silver hair, coiled into a formidable bun, glinted under the artificial light, and her perfectly tailored tweed blazer, though perhaps a shade too formal for a public high school, fit her like a second skin, a skin designed for intellectual combat. Mr. Henderson, her voice cut through the nascent murmur of the class, sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil. While your valiant efforts to construct a paper airplane capable of circumnavigating the globe are commendable, I must insist that, for the next 47 minutes, your aeronautical ambitions take a backseat to the tragic fate of Ophelia. Unless, of course, you believe your craft possesses the structural integrity to carry the weight of her madness. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. Henderson, a burly boy with a perpetual smirk and a crumpled sheet of notebook paper clutched in his hand, flushed a slow, angry crimson. He was accustomed to teachers yelling, to being sent to the principal's office, but Evelyn's wit always disarmed him, leaving him flailing in its elegant wake. He mumbled an apology, crushing the paper in his fist. Evelyn offered a thin, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Excellent. Now, as I was saying, Ophelia's lament is not merely a song of sorrow, but a profound descent into a world where language itself has ceased to offer solace, a broken mirror reflecting a fractured reality. From the back corner, Maya Rodriguez watched, a pen hovering motionless over her worn notebook. Her uniform, a hand-me-down, hung a little loose, a testament to her family's lean finances, and her usually anxious shoulders were hunched slightly forward, as if trying to shrink herself out of existence. But in this class, under Ms. Finch's gaze, she felt a different kind of intensity. She didn't always understand the archaic poetry, but she understood the precision of Evelyn's words, the way they moved like a skilled dancer, graceful and lethal. There was a power there, a shield and a sword forged from syllables. Maya often wondered if such a shield could protect her from the chaos that brewed silently in her own small apartment, if such a sword could cut through the quiet despair that sometimes settled over her mother's face. She saw the perfection of Ms. Finch, the absolute control, and wondered if it came at a cost. Today, as Evelyn dismantled Henderson's defiance with surgical precision, Maya felt a familiar flicker of awe, mixed with a deeper, unsettling recognition. A woman so utterly in command of her world, even if that world was just a classroom filled with restless teenagers. It was a fascinating, terrifying prospect. The bell shrieked, a jarring note after the quiet contemplation of Ophelia's fate. Students scrambled, chairs scraping, voices erupting into a cacophony of adolescent freedom. Evelyn watched them go, her gaze detached, a faint, almost imperceptible sag in her shoulders as the last one vanished. The performance was over. She gathered her papers, her tweed blazer suddenly feeling heavier, less like armor. Maya, still lost in thought, was one of the last to leave, her eyes darting towards Evelyn before she slipped out, a ghost in the bustling hallway. Evelyn didn't notice. The drive home was a descent. The vibrant intellectual energy of the classroom, the thrill of wielding her wit with purpose, bled away with each mile. The suburban landscape, with its manicured lawns and identical houses, felt less like a haven and more like a uniform, a beige expanse designed to stifle any flicker of individuality. Evelyn removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The sharp edges of her public persona began to soften, blurring into a tired weariness. Ms. Finch, the formidable intellectual, slowly dissolved, leaving behind Evelyn, the woman who felt increasingly small and unseen. Her car, a sensible, mid-range sedan, pulled into the driveway of a house that shimmered with an almost aggressive perfection. The lawn was impeccably manicured, the rose bushes pruned to within an inch of their lives, the windows gleaming with a spotless, unyielding polish. This was not a home that invited warmth, it demanded admiration. Evelyn had spent years curating this perfection, each carefully chosen piece of furniture, each neutral tone, a deliberate statement of control, a bulwark against the messiness of life. Now, it felt less like a testament to her taste and more like a museum exhibit of a life that wasn't quite hers. She fumbled with her keys, the metallic jingle echoing unnaturally loud in the evening quiet. The lock clicked, a final, definitive sound. The air inside was cool, still, and scented with a subtle, expensive air freshener, precisely lemon verbena. No lingering cooking smells, no comfortable clutter, just an immaculate, silent expanse. Evelyn shed her blazer, draping it over a perfectly upholstered armchair in the living room, a cardinal sin in her own meticulously structured domestic theology. But tonight, she simply couldn't bring herself to care. She loosened the bun of her hair, letting a few strands escape around her temples. "Arthur?" Her voice, usually so resonant, was a quiet question, a hesitant probe into the oppressive silence. A rustle came from the study, then the distinct click of a remote. Arthur emerged, a man whose presence was as muted as his taste in clothing. He was in his usual evening attire, a sensible navy polo shirt, pressed khaki trousers, and soft leather slippers. His receding hairline was perfectly combed, and his expression was habitually mild, almost bland, a well-polished surface that reflected nothing. "Evelyn, you're late." He didn't look up from the financial newspaper he was folding with meticulous care. It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact, delivered in a tone that somehow managed to convey both disapproval and weary resignation. Evelyn offered a brittle smile. "Just wrestling a few young minds into submission. You know, the usual gladiatorial combat of the English curriculum. Today's casualty was a particularly ambitious paper airplane enthusiast." She tried to inject a flicker of her classroom wit, a habit she'd cultivated to navigate the treacherous waters of their domestic silence. Arthur sighed, a soft, almost inaudible exhalation that nevertheless managed to deflate all the air from the room. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes a pale, unremarkable blue, meeting hers with a look that was less weary than simply dismissive. "Please, Evelyn, not today." The words hung in the air, heavier than any shout. "Not today," meaning your wit is tiresome, your day is irrelevant, your attempts at connection are an imposition. It was a familiar refrain, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of their marriage, more insidious than any outright argument. Her sharp tongue, so potent in the classroom, felt clumsy, useless here, a blunt instrument against Arthur's finely honed passive aggression. Evelyn's shoulders, which had relaxed slightly, stiffened again. She turned away, her gaze sweeping across the living room. The beige sofa, the carefully arranged throw pillows, the geometric patterns of the rug, the abstract art on the walls. Every detail was a testament to impeccable taste, meticulous planning, and utter joylessness. There were no worn spots on the cushions, no faint smudges on the glass coffee table, no piles of books or half-finished projects. It was a display home, permanently awaiting guests who would never quite feel at ease. She walked towards the window, pressing her hand against the cool, clean glass. Outside, twilight deepened, painting the sky in hues of lavender and steel gray. The streetlights flickered on, casting an artificial glow over the flawless lawns. This house, this life she had so painstakingly built, was her gilded cage. It was beautiful, undeniably so, admired by all who visited. But the gold bars were invisible, woven from silence, dismissed wit, and the slow, insidious drip of Arthur's unspoken resentment. She felt herself suffocating within its pristine walls, a performance artist trapped on a stage where her audience preferred her silent and perfect. The carefully curated beauty was not a comfort, but a constant, heavy reminder of the vibrant self she had buried beneath layers of witty banter and controlled perfection, a desperate defense against the despair that now felt dangerously close to consuming her. She closed her eyes, wishing for a noise, a disruption, anything to shatter the suffocating calm before the next day, and the next began to subtly erode what little spirit she had left. The front door closed with a soft click, sealing Evelyn inside the meticulously ordered silence of her home. Arthur's weary pronouncement, "Please, Evelyn, not today," still echoed in the pristine hallway, a dull thrum against the backdrop of her retreating professional facade. The tailored blazer, shed now over a cream-colored armchair, felt lighter than the invisible armor it had represented all day. Outside, the last vestiges of twilight bled across the suburban sky, painting the windows in hues of bruised purple and gray. Inside, the carefully calibrated lighting cast a uniform glow, illuminating not warmth, but an absence of shadows. Evelyn moved through the living room, her footsteps muffled by the plush, off-white carpet. Every cushion was plumped to perfection, every magazine aligned on the glass coffee table, every book on the built-in shelves arranged by height and hue. It was a museum of domesticity, she often thought, curated to such an exacting standard that breathing felt like a potential disturbance. She picked up a delicate porcelain figurine, a small, intricate ballet dancer, and set it back down, precisely where it had been before. A futile act, a gesture of control over a world that offered none. Arthur was in the kitchen, ostensibly preparing his evening tea, though the rattle of ceramic and the clink of a spoon against a mug often masked a deeper, more deliberate disruption. Evelyn leaned against the cool granite countertop, watching him. He stirred his Earl Grey with a precision that belied the simplicity of the task, his back to her, creating a wall of polite inattention. "The new vase arrived today," Evelyn said, her voice a little too bright, cutting through the domestic quiet. It was a mid-century Italian piece she'd found at an antique auction, its vibrant turquoise a rare splash of daring in their neutral palette. She had placed it on the dining room sideboard, admiring the way it caught the afternoon light. Arthur's stirring paused, then resumed. "Oh, that," he said, his tone flat without turning. "Yes, I saw it." Evelyn waited, a faint prickle of irritation beginning at the base of her neck. He always made her wait, forcing her to push the conversation. "Don't you think it's rather striking? A lovely counterpoint to the more subtle tones." She gestured vaguely at the beige walls, the oatmeal curtains, the taupe sofa, the unspoken implication to the utterly boring tones. He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the dining room table, pausing briefly on the vase, then settling on Evelyn with a sigh. "Striking, yes. Perhaps a little aggressive, wouldn't you say? Mother always preferred pieces with a bit more serenity." He picked up his mug, cradling it in both hands as if seeking warmth from the porcelain, not from the conversation. "She has such an eye for understated elegance. Remember that lovely crystal piece she had, the one you called dust trap chic?" Evelyn felt the familiar clench in her jaw. The crystal piece in question had been an abomination of cut glass, heavy and ostentatious, a relic from a bygone era that had, indeed, gathered dust with the efficiency of a lint roller. But to articulate that now, to defend her aesthetic, would only lead to a protracted, pointless debate where Arthur, by invoking the unimpeachable taste of his absent mother, would always win. He had a knack for twisting her precise observations into personal attacks, recasting her wit as malice. She tried anyway. "Dust trap chic, yes, a classic, but the turquoise has a certain vivacity. Doesn't it make you feel a little less like you're living in a particularly tasteful mausoleum?" She managed a faint, brittle smile, hoping her words might deflect his criticism, might even inject a sliver of humor into the sterile air. Arthur merely raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something almost pitying in his eyes. "Evelyn, really, it's just a vase. It's hardly a statement on the state of our souls, is it?" He took a deliberate sip of his tea, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Mother always said a home should be a refuge, not a gallery. A place to unwind, not to be constantly assaulted by bold choices." The words hung in the air, each one a tiny pinprick. Aggressive, mausoleum, assaulted. Her wit, usually a sharp rapier, felt like a blunt instrument against his veiled judgment. It wasn't the vase he was criticizing, it was her. Her choices, her taste, her very presence in their home. Her silence, for once, was not strategic. It was simply a lack of effective ammunition. Dinner that evening was, as usual, a meticulously choreographed affair. Salmon, lightly pan-seared, asparagus blanched to a perfect snap, and quinoa, precisely fluffed. Evelyn had chosen a crisp Sauvignon Blanc to accompany it, hoping its bright notes might lift the mood. It didn't. "The school assembly was quite the ordeal today," Evelyn offered, attempting to steer the conversation away from the unspoken tension that clung to the silverware. "Long-winded speeches from the principal, as per tradition. But Maya did an excellent job introducing me for the Teacher of the Month award. She has a real knack for public speaking, that girl." Evelyn felt a small, familiar surge of pride. The award, a modest plaque hidden away in her desk drawer, was a rare recognition of her often unseen dedication. She had poured herself into her students, into challenging their minds, and for a fleeting moment felt truly seen in the classroom. Arthur paused, a forkful of salmon halfway to his mouth. He set the fork down with a barely perceptible clink. "Teacher of the Month. Oh, yes, that." He dabbed at the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin. "Such a quaint little tradition, isn't it? Almost as if they're trying to encourage participation trophies for adults." He offered a small, thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I suppose it keeps morale up for those who need it, eh?" The crisp notes of the wine turned sour on Evelyn's tongue. Quaint. Participation trophies. His words, like tiny barbs, lodged themselves in her chest, deflating the fragile balloon of her accomplishment. It wasn't just a slight. It was a systemic dismantling of her efforts, her professional identity, the one sphere where she felt genuinely competent and appreciated. "Yes, well," Evelyn began, searching for a comeback, a cutting retort to parry his dismissive condescension. "Some of us enjoy a brief moment of public acknowledgement, Arthur, rather than finding our entire worth in the quiet contemplation of our own superior tastes." She tried to infuse it with her usual caustic charm, a glint of sardonic amusement. But the words felt hollow, a practiced performance that lacked conviction. Her energy, already drained by the vase discussion, felt utterly depleted. Arthur chuckled, a dry, almost pitying sound. "There you go, Evelyn. Always with the sharp edges, aren't you? Can't we just have a pleasant dinner without dissecting the fundamental flaws of modern society, or indeed each other?" He picked up his fork again, returning to his salmon as if the conversation was now closed, neatly filed away as another one of Evelyn's tiresome tendencies. Her wit, usually her weapon and shield, now felt like a blunted sword, useless against his Teflon charm. It didn't just fall flat, it evaporated in the air, leaving her exposed. The silence that descended was thick, not peaceful, but heavy with unspoken grievances, accusations, and the bitter taste of defeat. The elegant salmon, the perfectly blanched asparagus, the carefully chosen wine, all of it felt like a meticulously arranged tableau of her own suffocating mediocrity. Later, the silence deepened, becoming an almost tangible entity in their sprawling, sterile home. Arthur retreated to his study, the faint, repetitive click of his online solitaire game drifting from behind the closed door. Evelyn found herself in the master bedroom, a cavernous space of muted tones and expensive fabrics. The king-sized bed, impeccably made, seemed to mock the distance between them. She sat on the edge, the cool duvet against her hands, and watched the moonlight paint pale rectangles on the walls. The house, once her canvas, her meticulous creation, now felt like a cage. Every perfect detail, every carefully chosen object, every dust-free surface screamed of a life performed, not lived. She had built this pristine world brick by sterile brick, thinking control over her surroundings would translate into control over her life, over herself. Instead, it had become a gilded prison, a monument to a joyless existence. Arthur's subtle sighs, his dismissive glances, his quiet invalidation of her worth, they were not grand acts of cruelty. They were insidious, microscopic erosions, wearing away at her spirit, her confidence, her very sense of self, day by painstaking day. He didn't yell, didn't rage. He simply dismissed. He shrunk her world, one sarcastic comment, one weary sigh, one pitying glance at a time, until she felt smaller than the porcelain ballet dancer in the living room. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth sheets. Her sharp tongue, once a vibrant expression of her intellect, a source of fierce pride, had become a mere reactive shield, a desperate parry against 1,000 unseen cuts. It no longer sparked joy or connection. It simply defended, futilely, against the slow, steady drain of her essence. What good was a weapon if it only served to announce your defeat? Evelyn lay back, staring up at the ceiling, the carefully placed recess lighting off now, leaving only the cold glow of the moon. She felt a profound weariness settle into her bones, a despair that seeped into her very marrow. This wasn't living. This was slowly fatting, painstakingly curated into oblivion. The air in the room, still and heavy, felt like it was pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She closed her eyes, wishing for an escape, for a rupture in the suffocating sameness. She didn't know what it would look like, only that the next subtle erosion might be the one that finally erased her completely. The thought was a quiet, desperate plea in the vast, silent prison of her home. Something had to give, something had to break. The hum of Evelyn Finch's meticulously maintained Audi was the only sound that pierced the hushed suburban twilight as she turned onto her street. The day, spent expertly wielding cynicism and Shakespearean allusions to prod her students into critical thought, had left her mentally sharp but emotionally drained. The classroom was a stage where her wit truly sparkled, a precise instrument of control and intellectual dominance. Here, in her polished, impersonal sedan, it felt like a dull, heavy stone in her stomach. Her house loomed ahead, a monument to understated elegance, its pale gray siding and immaculate landscaping a testament to the relentless pursuit of order. She parked with practiced precision, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden, complete silence. This was the liminal space, the brief pause between the performance of Miss Finch and the quiet despair of Evelyn. She took a deep, fortifying breath, the scent of expensive leather and air freshener filling her lungs, and pushed open the door. The hallway, usually a pristine corridor of quiet welcome, assaulted her senses immediately. Two large, floral-patterned suitcases, bulging at their seams like overfed beasts, sat incongruously against the cream-colored wainscoting. A faint, cloying scent, lilac and mothballs, unmistakably, hung in the air, foreign and invasive. Evelyn's perfectly arched brow twitched. Her key, usually a silent entry, seemed to scrape loudly in the lock. As she stepped fully inside, the hushed murmur of voices from the living room confirmed her instant dread. Not the television, nor Arthur's low drone on a work call, but a higher, reedy cadence she knew but hadn't heard in years. Beatrice. She found Arthur perched on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, a nervous, almost giddy smile on his face, holding a delicate china teacup as if it might shatter at any moment. Opposite him, nestled deep into the cushions, was Beatrice. Arthur's mother, all 82 years of her, looking as dainty and fragile as a porcelain doll. Her silver hair, coiled into a perfect, improbable bun, glinted under the recessed lighting. She wore a prim, pastel twin set, complete with a brooch that resembled a cluster of synthetic grapes, and her tiny feet, clad in sensible leather pumps, barely touched the hand-knotted Persian rug. A tea tray laden with Evelyn's best antique rose-patterned china, a set reserved for special occasions, never for casual, midweek consumption, sat precariously on the glass-top coffee table. A fresh pot brewed, its steam curling upward, adding to the cloying floral scent. "Evelyn, darling, you're home," Beatrice chirped, her voice unexpectedly strong for someone so seemingly delicate. She extended a hand, bony and speckled with age spots, but surprisingly firm as Evelyn dutifully took it. "We were just having a lovely chat." Arthur cleared his throat, pushing himself up. "Evelyn, mother arrived a little unexpectedly this afternoon. Her boiler burst, you see, and the insurance claim is, well, it's a mess. So she'll be staying with us for a while." He avoided Evelyn's gaze, fiddling with a cufflink that was already perfectly aligned. His tone was breezy, dismissive, as if discussing a minor plumbing leak, not a seismic shift in Evelyn's meticulously ordered universe. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. A while, the words echoed, cold and hollow in the pristine, unnervingly quiet house. Her mind, usually a fortress of logical precision, reeled. The suitcases, the china, the lilac perfume, the very air itself felt thick with an unwelcome presence, a foreign body infiltrating the carefully constructed sterility of her marriage. She swallowed, trying to dislodge the lump forming in her throat. Her shield of wit, usually so quick to deploy, felt momentarily jammed. "Unexpectedly," Evelyn managed, the single word sharp, cutting through the saccharine sweetness of Beatrice's greeting. "I see." She cast a glance at Arthur, a silent volley of accusation, but he was already retreating into his typical fog of benign obliviousness. He gave his mother's shoulder a comforting pat. "Yes, well, it's rather a blessing, isn't it, dear?" Beatrice interjected, her smile never wavering, though a subtle glint, sharp and knowing, flickered in her pale blue eyes. "An old woman living alone, you know. I nearly froze to death. Arthur, my wonderful boy, insisted." She squeezed Arthur's hand, a delicate, possessive gesture. Arthur swelled with pride. Of course, Mother, it's no trouble at all. Evelyn, darling, you don't mind, do you? Just until things get sorted, might be a few weeks or a month. The insurance companies, you know how they are. He waved a hand vaguely, as if batting away an unpleasant fly. He had already decided, of course. Beatrice's presence wasn't a request, it was a decree delivered with Arthur's doting complicity. Evelyn had no voice in this, no room to object, not without sounding like a heartless shrew, which was precisely the corner Arthur always managed to back her into. Evelyn's breath hitched. A few weeks, or a month. Her mind raced, mapping out the meticulous routines that governed her home, the quiet moments of solitude she snatched after teaching, the precise order of her life. All of it, she realized with a sickening lurch, was about to be irrevocably undone. No, Evelyn said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual caustic charm. I suppose not. She moved further into the room, kicking one of the offending suitcases with a little more force than necessary. The scent of mothballs intensified. Beatrice chuckled, a soft, dry sound like rustling autumn leaves. Such a good sport, Evelyn. I always told Arthur you were a strong woman, not like those delicate little hothouse flowers. Her gaze flickered to Evelyn's prized orchid, a rare, pristine white phalaenopsis with a delicate blush at its heart, perched majestically on the antique mahogany side table. It was Evelyn's single indulgence, a vibrant splash of life in her otherwise emotionally sterile home, its care a precise, almost meditative ritual. Would you like some tea, dear? Arthur offered, oblivious to the undercurrents. Mother brewed a lovely Earl Grey. Evelyn looked at the steaming cup in Arthur's hand, then at the antique tea set, suddenly feeling like an intruder in her own home. Earl Grey, how very predictable. She allowed a hint of her usual sardonic edge to creep into her voice, a desperate attempt to reclaim some shred of herself, to prick the suffocating bubble of feigned domestic bliss. I suppose a simple builder's tea just wouldn't do, not with the theatricality of a burst boiler. Beatrice's sickly sweet smile didn't falter, though the glint in her eyes sharpened further. Oh, Evelyn, always so witty. You do have such a way with words. Your students must adore you. As for my tea, dear, I'm afraid my delicate constitution simply can't abide anything less than the best. One must maintain certain standards, even in distress. She took a delicate sip, her little finger extended in an almost comically exaggerated gesture. It was a perfect parry, making Evelyn's cutting remark sound petty and uncaring. Evelyn felt her wit, usually a rapier, turn into a clumsy bludgeon. It was useless against this woman, whose frailty was a weapon and whose charm was an armor. A quiet rage began to simmer beneath Evelyn's composed exterior. She felt a phantom tightening in her chest, the walls of her home, once a carefully constructed shield, now closing in on her, trapping her. Well, Evelyn said, forcing a brittle smile, I suppose I'll need to make myself a proper coffee then. My constitution requires something a little more robust to cope with. Unexpected guests. She turned towards the kitchen, but Beatrice's voice, a little louder, stopped her. Oh, speaking of unexpected, Evelyn, dear, Beatrice began, her voice dripping with false concern, do be careful with that rather precarious plant. She gestured with a delicate hand towards the orchid. It looks awfully top-heavy on that table. You know how clumsy I am these days. Evelyn froze. The orchid was perfectly stable, carefully balanced, a testament to her precise eye. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was not a warning. It was a veiled threat. Before Evelyn could reply, before she could even turn, Beatrice shifted. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a subtle twist of her small frame, then an exaggerated gasp. Her elbow, seemingly by accident, nudged the side table. The delicate vase, holding the pristine orchid, wobbled. Evelyn watched, transfixed, as if in a slow-motion nightmare. The vase tilted, a cascade of white petals and deep green leaves following gravity's cruel pull. The pristine white orchid, her symbol of controlled beauty and quiet resilience, plummeted to the polished hardwood floor. The ceramic pot shattered with a sharp, sickening crack, scattering rich, dark soil and shards of glazed pottery across the rug. The stem of the orchid, snapped clean in two, lay lifelessly amidst the ruin. Oh, dear me, Beatrice cried, clutching her chest, her face a mask of feigned horror. "How terribly clumsy of me! I warned you, didn't I, Evelyn? Such a delicate thing. Oh, my poor nerves." She closed her eyes, a delicate hand pressed to her temple. Arthur, ever the doting son, was instantly at his mother's side. "Mother, are you all right? Evelyn, for heaven's sake, look what's happened. The poor plant." His voice was laced with exasperation, directed entirely at Evelyn, as if the orchid's demise was somehow her fault for merely existing in the same room. He knelt, not to gather the shattered pot, but to gently rub Beatrice's arm, his brow furrowed with concern for her nerves. Evelyn stared at the destruction, her breath caught in her throat, a physical constriction. The broken orchid, the scattered soil, the very vulnerability of the one-sprout plant felt like a personal assault. It was not an accident. Evelyn knew, deep in her gut, that this was a deliberate act of war, a calculated strike at her most sacred, quiet sanctuary. The sickly sweet scent of lilac and mothballs now felt like the smell of victory. Her sharp tongue, the very weapon she relied on, felt useless, blunted by the sheer audacity of Beatrice's performance and Arthur's immediate complicity. She stood there, frozen, watching Arthur coddle his frail mother amidst the wreckage of her prized possession. The air hummed with unspoken declarations, with the sudden, terrifying realization that her life, her home, her carefully constructed equilibrium had just been irrevocably, profoundly shattered. The battle had begun, and Evelyn, for the first time in a very long time, felt utterly, chillingly helpless. The serpent had indeed entered her garden, and it had wasted no time in striking. The pristine surfaces of Evelyn's kitchen, once a testament to her meticulous control, now felt like a stage set for a farce, meticulously sabotaged. It had begun subtly, as all insidious things do. A misplaced spatula, then the coffee beans migrated from their airtight canister to a Ziploc bag, as if making a break for freedom. Then, the knives, once neatly sorted by utility and size in their wooden block, were jumbled, an anarchic metallic tangle. This morning, however, was a full-scale mutiny. Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, a silent sentinel of mounting frustration. The sun, usually a cheerful conspirator in her morning ritual, sliced through the kitchen window, highlighting dust motes dancing a mocking jig in the chaos. Her prized orchid, the one Beatrice had accidentally toppled just days before, still sat on the counter, its stem taped precariously, a bloom already wilting, a single bruise blooming on a normally flawless petal. It was a mirror, she realized with a jolt of bitter insight, of herself. She took a fortifying breath. No, not a mirror. She was not wilting, not yet. Her routine, honed over 2 decades, was usually a symphony of precise movements. Espresso machine humming, newspaper unfolding, the satisfying clink of ceramic on granite. Today, it was a cacophony of minor annoyances. The espresso machine, for instance, had been moved from its designated spot by the window to a precarious perch next to the toaster, its power cord straining. The kettle, usually a sleek metallic sentinel on the hob, was now nestled amongst a collection of Beatrice's antique teacups, smelling faintly of lavender potpourri. "Good morning, dear," Beatrice's voice, a saccharine whisper, preceded her into the kitchen. She floated in, a vision in a pale blue dressing gown and fluffy slippers, her silver hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. She looked impossibly fragile, like a dandelion puffball caught in a breeze. Evelyn, however, knew dandelions could be remarkably resilient and their seeds spread everywhere. "Sleep well." "As a matter of fact, no, Beatrice," Evelyn replied, her voice a little sharper than she intended. She was already rummaging through a newly organized chaotic drawer, seeking her preferred tea. Earl Grey, specifically. She usually found it instantly. Now it was gone, replaced by a tin of something labeled digestion support herbal blend. "I'm afraid I spent a good portion of the night wondering where all the tea has gone." Beatrice offered a sympathetic titter. "Oh, that. Yes, I did a little tidying. It was all so monochromatic, darling. I thought, let's inject some life. Your Earl Grey is in the laundry room with the fabric softeners. So much more fragrant when you open the cupboard, wouldn't you agree?" Evelyn stared at her, her mind trying to process the sheer, audacious illogicality. The laundry room, with fabric softener. Her razor wit, usually a swift rapier, felt like a blunt spoon. "Fragrance," she repeated slowly, is rarely my primary criterion for tea storage, Beatrice. Functionality usually takes precedence. Beatrice merely smiled, a beatific expression that suggested Evelyn was being utterly unreasonable. Well, you'll find it now, won't you? And don't you just love how the spices are alphabetized? She gestured vaguely towards the pantry, where Evelyn knew her carefully arranged spices were now a jumbled mess, some jars even open. Evelyn felt a vain throb in her temple, alphabetized by Beatrice's own inscrutable logic, no doubt. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing the neatly labeled jars she had spent an entire Saturday afternoon arranging by culinary category. Now, undoubtedly, cayenne would be next to cinnamon, and rosemary might find itself a neighbor to nutmeg. Arthur shuffled in, a rumpled vision in silk pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, ladies. What's for breakfast?" He yawned, oblivious to the battle raging around him. He poured himself a glass of orange juice from the fridge, which, to Evelyn's chagrin, was now organized by expiration date, meaning milk was behind the salad dressing and the butter was in a vegetable drawer. "Your mother has improved the kitchen, Arthur," Evelyn said, her voice laced with an irony so thick it could be spread on toast. Arthur squinted at the counter, then at Beatrice, then back at the counter. "Oh," he said then to his mother, "that's efficient, Mum." He then turned to Evelyn. "It looks different, Evelyn, gives it character." He patted Beatrice's hand. "You're a real firecracker, aren't you, Mum?" Evelyn bit back a truly uncharitable remark. Character, she thought. It gives it the character of a crime scene where the only victim is my sanity. Her wit, usually sharp enough to slice through steel, felt like it was bouncing off a pillow. The next few days were a relentless campaign of subtle infiltration. Evelyn's carefully alphabetized book collection was rearranged by color, her classical music CDs interspersed with Beatrice's collection of operettas, and her pristine linen closet now featured a stack of embroidered doilies. Each change, small in itself, was a systematic dismantling of Evelyn's world, a quiet claim of territory. Her once sacred, meticulously ordered home was becoming a labyrinth of well-meaning chaos. Then came the mail. Evelyn arrived home from school, exhausted from a day of intellectual gladiatorship in the classroom, only to find Beatrice perched on the antique hall chair, meticulously sorting through a stack of envelopes. A faint flush touched Beatrice's cheeks when Evelyn walked in, a fleeting flicker of guilt quickly masked by her customary sweet smile. "Ah, Evelyn, dear, just in time. The mail came and it was all a bit of a jumble. One can hardly tell whose is whose these days, can one?" Beatrice chirped, holding up a letter. It was a cream-colored envelope, addressed in elegant script to Evelyn. It was from the English department at the university, an invitation to speak at a literary seminar, a small, personal victory Evelyn had been looking forward to. "This one's yours," Beatrice said, handing it over. "It looks frightfully important. Something about post-structuralism and the female voice. Goodness, I do hope it's not too challenging for the young minds. I always say stick to the classics. Shakespeare and Austen, tried and true, keeps things proper." Evelyn felt a cold wave wash over her. Beatrice had not just sorted her mail, she had read it. The envelope was subtly creased along the flap, a tiny tear visible near the university crest. She knew, with chilling certainty, that this was no accident. "You opened my letter, Beatrice," Evelyn stated, her voice flat, devoid of its usual inflection. Beatrice's smile wavered, then solidified into an expression of bewildered innocence. "Opened? Good heavens, no, dear, it must have been loose. These new envelopes, so flimsy. I simply glanced at the contents to ascertain who it belonged to. One must be responsible, mustn't one? I thought it might be Arthur's. He gets so many requests for his expertise, She paused, then added, "But no, it was yours. How intriguing." Arthur, just then, emerged from the den, scrolling through his phone. "What's intriguing, Mum?" Beatrice beamed at him. "Oh, just Evelyn's literary circles, darling, so highbrow. Not like your practical, sensible work, is it? Dealing with real-world problems. Engineers, she said, directing her gaze pointedly at Evelyn. They build things that last, not just theories." Evelyn felt a familiar spike of anger, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of utter violation. Her private invitation, her intellectual pursuits, were now fair game for Beatrice's casual dismissal and Arthur's unwitting complicity. She wanted to unleash a cutting remark, something about the fragility of real-world minds unable to grasp theories, but the words caught in her throat. It felt pointless. Beatrice would just smile, Arthur would shrug, and the barb would dissolve into the ether, leaving Evelyn feeling more exposed than ever. The family meals became a particular gauntlet. Evelyn, despite her mounting resentment, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, cooking Arthur's favorite dishes, ensuring the dining room was pristine, though Beatrice's doilies now adorned every surface. But the atmosphere was poisoned. One evening, over a perfectly roasted chicken and asparagus, Beatrice held court. "Arthur, darling, do tell us again about that incredible deal you closed last quarter. So impressive. Not many men have your foresight, your business acumen. You truly are a chip off the old block." She squeezed his hand with a delicate flourish. Arthur preened, a rare blush coloring his cheeks. "Oh, it was nothing, Mum, just good strategic planning." "Strategic planning," Beatrice exclaimed, as if it were the most wondrous feat known to man. "Imagine, and Evelyn, dear, you just teach English, don't you? That's lovely, so creative, though I do wonder, do they still teach proper grammar these days? All those youngsters with their slang and their devices. Such a shame. It was different in my day. Women like us had a proper place in the world." She paused, her eyes twinkling. "Of course, some women choose to dedicate themselves to careers. So admirable. So modern." Evelyn felt the pointed barb land squarely. Women like us. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Evelyn, with her career, was somehow less, somehow incomplete. Less of a woman, less of a wife, less of anything that truly mattered. Arthur, beaming under his mother's praise, didn't even seem to notice the shift in Beatrice's tone or the subtle sting directed at his wife. Evelyn's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her mind raced, searching for the perfect counter, something devastating yet elegant. Something that would expose Beatrice's thinly veiled misogyny and Arthur's blind adoration. But the words eluded her. All she could think of was the image of the wilted orchid, the chaotic kitchen, the invaded letter. Her sharpness felt blunted, her quickness dulled by exhaustion and despair. She cleared her throat. "Well, Beatrice, I assure you, proper grammar is still a cornerstone of coherent thought, though it seems some might benefit from a refresher in the nuances of implication versus direct assertion." It was a decent retort, a subtle jab, but it lacked its usual punch, its venom. It sounded, even to her own ears, weak. Beatrice merely blinked at her, then turned back to Arthur. "Isn't she clever, darling? Always with the big words, just like that young man on the television, the one who talks so fast about politics." She waved a dismissive hand. Arthur chuckled. "Yes, Evelyn always has a way with words, Mum." He said it not with pride, but with a weary indulgence, as if she were a child who had attempted a difficult party trick. Evelyn looked down at her plate. Her once formidable wit, her pride and joy, was now just a dull clatter, an ineffectual pecking at stone. She felt utterly, terrifyingly helpless. That night, the conversation with Arthur was inevitable. Evelyn found him in the living room, ostensibly reading a newspaper, though his eyes seemed to be fixed on some distant, internal landscape. "Arthur, we need to talk," Evelyn began, trying to keep her voice even. "Your mother's behavior is becoming untenable. The kitchen, the mail, the constant, veiled insults at dinner. It's too much." Arthur sighed, a long, put-upon exhalation that grated on Evelyn's nerves. He slowly folded his newspaper, placing it meticulously on the coffee table. "Evelyn, really, must we do this? She's 82 years old. She's just trying to be helpful." "Helpful?" Evelyn's voice rose, betraying her carefully constructed calm. "She helps by turning my home into a labyrinth of her own design. She helps by invading my privacy. She helps by subtly belittling me at every opportunity." Arthur looked at her, his expression a mixture of mild annoyance and utter incomprehension. "You're being hysterical, Evelyn. She's an old woman. She doesn't mean any harm. You're always so dramatic about things. Can't you just let it go? Have some compassion, for heaven's sake. She's lost her husband, her home. She needs us." "Hysterical? The word struck Evelyn like a physical blow. It was the ultimate dismissive weapon, designed to invalidate her feelings, to paint her as irrational and oversensitive. And compassion, for Beatrice's calculated cruelty, for Arthur's passive blindness. Compassion, Evelyn repeated, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Arthur, she destroyed my orchid. She moved my entire pantry to the laundry room. She read my private correspondence. That isn't compassion, Arthur. That's psychological warfare wrapped in lace. Arthur ran a hand through his thinning hair. Evelyn, honestly, it's an orchid. And the male, she made a mistake. You're magnifying everything. She's just a sweet, frail old lady who wants to feel useful. You're being cruel. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering, and for a terrifying moment, Evelyn saw not just passive indifference, but a deliberate, almost malicious blindness. He truly believed it. He truly believed she was the problem. She stared at him, her chest heaving. She needed to say something. Something cutting, something that would finally pierce his complacent armor. You're not just blind, Arthur, you're complicit. You're a willing accomplice in your own mother's campaign to erase me. Or perhaps I should move your socks to the pantry, Arthur, just so you understand what helpful truly entails. But the words never formed. They simply evaporated on her tongue, leaving a bitter taste. Her sharp tongue, her most formidable weapon, felt limp and useless. It was no longer a scalpel of truth, but a desperate, ineffectual plea against a tide of manipulation and complicity. She saw herself, standing there, reduced to begging for validation from a man who refused to see her, let alone defend her. The suffocation was complete. The room, her home, her life, pressed in on her, a sealed coffin. She was utterly, completely, helplessly alone. She fled to her bedroom, slamming the door, the sound echoing hollowly in the meticulously silent house. She stood by the window, staring out at the manicured lawn, the perfectly symmetrical rose bushes she had once nurtured. They, too, felt like a performance now, a symbol of a life she was losing, brick by carefully placed brick. Her eyes drifted to her bedside table, where a copy of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own lay open, a bookmark tucked halfway through. A quiet sanctuary, a space for thought, for independence. Her mind drifted, a desperate, scattered thing. She heard the soft click of Beatrice's bedroom door down the hall. A quiet, knowing smile Evelyn imagined playing on her lips. Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting back the burning behind them. She felt utterly depleted, her resilience eroding with each passing day. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the walls of her prison were still closing in. Tomorrow, she thought, she would have to face the students again, become Miss Finch, command respect. But where would she find the strength? And what if Beatrice decided to extend her helpfulness beyond the walls of their home? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through her. No, surely not. Her school was her one remaining bastion, her true sanctuary. It had to be. She clung to that thought, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The fluorescent hum of the school library usually offered Evelyn a specific kind of sterile peace, a sanctuary of ordered knowledge, a place where the chaos of her personal life could, for a few hours, be relegated to a distant, muffled echo. Here, amidst the hushed rustle of turning pages and the low murmur of student research, her intellect was respected, her sharp observations appreciated as insights, not barbs. But as she rounded the corner of the nonfiction stacks, a sight so utterly improbable, so perfectly designed to puncture the last vestiges of her controlled existence, stopped her dead. Beatrice. Not a mirage, not a trick of the light playing on Evelyn's increasingly frayed nerves. Beatrice, Arthur's octogenarian mother, stood by the circulation desk, a saccharine smile plastered across her face, charming Mrs. Albright, the usually formidable head librarian, with a practiced ease that made Evelyn's stomach clench. Her silver hair, freshly coiffed into a demure bun, gleamed under the unforgiving institutional lighting. She wore a floral apron, absurdly cheerful, over a pale blue cardigan, radiating an aura of benevolent, grandmotherly helpfulness that Evelyn knew was as genuine as a $3 bill. "Evelyn, darling," Beatrice trilled, her voice carrying a little too loudly in the normally quiet space, drawing the attention of a handful of students. "What a delightful surprise. Mrs. Albright was just telling me about the incredible work you do with these bright young minds. I simply had to volunteer. A woman of my age, one feels so useless at home. Arthur insisted I get out more. Isn't that sweet? The question, of course, was purely rhetorical, delivered with an almost imperceptible flick of Beatrice's eyes towards Evelyn, a glint that belied the innocent flutter of her frail-looking hands. Arthur insisted. Arthur. Evelyn swallowed, tasting ash. Her husband, whose doting complicity enabled every single one of his mother's insidious attacks, had not only allowed this, but orchestrated it. He had allowed Beatrice to follow her, to cross the invisible line between her private misery and her professional refuge. Surprise is certainly one word for it, Beatrice, Evelyn managed, her voice a little too tight, her sharp tongue momentarily blunted by sheer, unadulterated horror. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The school, her school, the one place where her Ms. Finch persona felt substantial, inviolable. Now even that was contaminated. Mrs. Albright, a woman whose stern spectacles usually perched on the bridge of her nose like tiny, disapproving gargoyles, beamed at Beatrice. Isn't she a godsend, Miss Finch? So organized, and she certainly knows her way around the Dewey Decimal System. A true asset. A true asset, Evelyn thought, was a viper in a basket of doves. She watched as Beatrice, with a seemingly accidental gesture, nudged a precarious stack of returned books, sending them cascading to the floor with a soft thud. Before Mrs. Albright could react, Beatrice let out a small, apologetic gasp, her eyes wide with feigned distress. "Oh, dear me, my clumsy old hands. So sorry, Mrs. Albright. Let me just, these knees. They simply aren't what they used to be." Of course, Beatrice would then stand there, lamenting her decrepitude, until a younger, stronger person, or two, or three, rushed to assist her, allowing her to command attention and guilt without lifting a finger. It was her signature move, the weaponized incompetence that had already made Evelyn's kitchen a minefield. Evelyn walked past them, her jaw tight, ignoring the impulse to help. Let Mrs. Albright learn the hard way. She headed for her usual quiet corner, a small reading nook tucked behind the literary criticism, hopping to reclaim a few minutes of solitude before her next class. But even there, the air felt different, heavy with the saccharine scent of Beatrice's lavender sachet, a cloying sweetness that now permeated every corner of Evelyn's existence. Later, during her brief 20-minute break, Evelyn sought refuge in the staff room, a space usually buzzing with the low thrum of weary educators. She poured herself a lukewarm coffee, her fingers trembling slightly around the mug. Just as she was contemplating the profound injustice of her life, Teacher Pendleton entered, her posture as meticulously starched as her blouse, followed closely by Beatrice, who was carrying a tray of suspiciously perfect-looking lemon squares. "Oh, Miss Finch, just the person I was hopping to run into," Beatrice chirped, setting the tray down with a flourish. "Arthur's mother, everyone. She's volunteered to help organize our rather chaotic library," Teacher Pendleton explained, her voice stiff, a subtle hint of discomfort in her tone. Even Pendleton, with her almost robotic adherence to routine, seemed to sense something was amiss. "I was just telling dear Mrs. Pendleton," Beatrice continued, cutting Evelyn off before she could even formulate a sardonic reply, "how fascinating it is to observe the evolution of teaching methods. Back in Arthur's day, it was all Shakespeare and Austen proper literature. But now, well, Mrs. Pendleton was telling me about some of the more modern texts you teach, Evelyn." She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air, a silent judgment delivered with a sweet smile. "It's certainly bold to challenge tradition so directly, isn't it? I'm sure the children appreciate the novelty." The thinly veiled critique hung like a poison dart. Modern, bold, novelty. Each word, seemingly innocuous, was designed to imply lack of rigor, a dismissal of Evelyn's intellectual choices. Teacher Pendleton, ever risk-averse, shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Finch does integrate classic and contemporary texts, Beatrice. It's part of the curriculum refresh." Her defense was weak, almost apologetic. Evelyn felt a surge of cold fury. This was her turf, her intellectual ground, and Beatrice, with her false humility and weaponized civility, was systematically undermining her, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of her colleagues. Her sharp tongue, usually so quick to parry, felt heavy, leaden. What could she say? A sharp retort would only prove Beatrice's unspoken point, that Evelyn was difficult, unconventional, perhaps even unprofessional. The very essence of her Ms. Finch persona, the authority she projected, was being subtly eroded, minute by minute. She gripped her mug, forcing a tight smile. Indeed, Beatrice, it's a brave new world. Some of us actually prepare students for it rather than simply preserving relics. The words felt clumsy, forced, lacking their usual surgical precision. It was a dull knife against a master fencer. Beatrice merely chuckled, a gentle, dismissive sound. "Oh, Evelyn, always so spirited. You never change." The implication was clear. Evelyn was a predictable, unpleasant entity, easily managed. The conversation moved on to the school's bake sale, but Evelyn heard none of it. Her professional sanctuary, her last remaining fortress, had been breached. The quiet pride she took in her intellect, in her ability to shape young minds, felt contaminated by Beatrice's insidious presence. There was no escape. She was surrounded, suffocating, a clever fish trapped in a decorative bowl, its sharp teeth useless against the glass. The bell for her next class, 11th grade AP English, was a welcome clang. Anything to get away. She gathered her papers, her mind a whirlwind of frustrated anger. As she hurried down the hall, she spotted a figure hunched over a laptop in an empty classroom at the end of the corridor. It was Maya. Maya, the quiet, struggling student whose nascent intelligence Evelyn had glimpsed beneath layers of shyness and distraction. Evelyn paused, a faint alarm buzzing in her brain. That classroom was usually locked. Curiosity, sharper than her immediate despair, nudged her forward. She pushed the door open softly. Maya didn't even look up. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. On the screen, 2 windows were open side by side. One, a pristine essay on the Great Gatsby, rife with eloquent prose and sophisticated literary analysis. The other, an open browser tab, revealing the very same essay, hosted on a questionable online paper mill. Evelyn's breath hitched. Plagiarism. Gross, undeniable plagiarism. Her immediate professional instinct was to explode, to deliver the kind of scorching intellectual takedown that would leave Maya reeling, humiliated, and quite possibly expelled. This was a violation of the highest academic order, a fundamental betrayal of trust. But then she looked closer at Maya. The girl's shoulders were hunched, a defensive posture Evelyn recognized intimately. Her usually neat ponytail was messy, strands escaping around her face. There was a raw, desperate vulnerability in the way her fingers trembled, a mirror of Evelyn's own shaking hands just moments before. "Maya," Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly soft, lacking its usual disciplinary edge. Maya flinched, startled as if caught stealing. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with terror then shame. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and sickly. She tried to stammer out an excuse to close the laptop, but her hands seemed frozen. Evelyn closed the classroom door behind her, clicking the lock, not to trap Maya, but to ensure their conversation remained unheard. "Don't bother," Evelyn said, walking slowly towards the desk. "I saw enough." She stood over Maya, her shadow falling across the girl's small, defeated frame. Maya's eyes, usually downcast or guarded, now met Evelyn, brimming with unshed tears. There was a profound, aching vulnerability there, a silent plea that transcended the simple act of academic fraud. Evelyn saw it a flicker of her own reflection, the fear of failure, the crushing weight of expectation, the desperate, clumsy attempt to survive in a world that felt too big, too demanding, too relentless. She remembered her own desperate measures, the ways she had twisted and honed her intellect into a weapon, not always for truth, but for survival, for defense. She remembered the suffocating feeling of being small, of being undermined, of feeling like her very essence was being slowly, painstakingly erased. This wasn't a defiant, rebellious act. This was a cry for help, cloaked in academic dishonesty. Evelyn pulled up a chair, turning it around and straddling it, facing Maya directly. Her usual formidable teacher persona softened around the edges, replaced by something quieter, more observant. "Why?" she asked, not with accusation, but with a genuine, low question, her gaze unwavering. Maya choked back a sob. I couldn't write it. My brain just stopped. I tried, Miss Finch, I really did. But everything's just too much." Her voice was a bare whisper, heavy with an unspoken burden. Evelyn watched her, truly saw her. The dark circles under Maya's eyes, the faint tremor in her lip. It wasn't just about an essay. It was about something far deeper, something that resonated with Evelyn's own silent scream. The air in the room, thick with Maya's shame, began to feel like a reflection of the suffocating air Evelyn breathed at home. The anger and frustration Evelyn had felt towards Beatrice, towards Arthur, towards her own trapped existence didn't vanish, but it shifted. It coalesced into a different kind of energy, a quiet, potent understanding. She knew this feeling, this desperation, this sense of being utterly overwhelmed by forces beyond one's control. She had lived it. She was living it. "Too much," Evelyn repeated softly, her voice devoid of judgment. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "Tell me about too much, Maya." The vulnerability in Maya's eyes, so raw and exposed, felt like a direct punch to Evelyn's gut. It triggered not condemnation, but a sudden, searing recognition. It was the same trapped, aching look she'd seen in her own reflection, the desperate eyes of a woman whose world was slowly shrinking, whose voice was being muted, whose very self was under siege. A flicker ignited within Evelyn, a spark in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't just Maya she was seeing. It was her younger self, her true self, before Arthur and Beatrice had systematically begun their slow, meticulous work of erosion. The girl who had once believed her sharp mind could conquer anything, before it became solely a shield. And for the first time in what felt like years, Evelyn felt a new kind of sharpness stir within her, not for a cutting remark, but for something else entirely. Something to protect, to guide, to ignite. Something more profound than mere defense. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming, and perhaps about fighting a different kind of battle, not just for herself, but for another soul who, like her, was on the verge of being made small. The fluorescent hum of the empty classroom seemed to amplify the silence, pressing down on Evelyn. Outside, the last bell had long since rung, scattering the students into the late afternoon sun. Now, only the low thrum of the air conditioning broke the stillness, and the faint, nervous rustle of Maya's fingers against the strap of her worn backpack. Evelyn sat perched on the edge of her desk, not in her usual authoritative stance, but a little looser, a little less composed. The plagiarized essay, a damning testament to Maya's desperation, lay between them on the scarred wood, a silent accusation. "So, Maya," Evelyn began, her voice softer than Maya had ever heard it, yet still possessing that undeniable edge. "We need to discuss this." She gestured vaguely at the essay, a sea of copied words that drowned Maya's own fledgling thoughts. Evelyn had seen enough students try this. Usually it was met with a cutting remark about intellectual integrity and a swift, unsentimental failing grade. But something in Maya's wide, haunted eyes, something in the way her shoulders seemed perpetually hunched, had snagged on Evelyn's own buried past. That desperate, small feeling, the overwhelming pressure to perform, to be something you weren't, or couldn't quite be, no matter how hard you tried. Maya mumbled something incoherent, her gaze fixed on her battered sneakers. I didn't mean to, Miss Finch. I ran out of time. I panicked." The words were rehearsed, flimsy, and Evelyn knew it. But there was a tremor in Maya's voice that resonated. Evelyn sighed, a sound that held more weariness than judgment. "Panicked, yes. I understand panic, Maya. But panic, like any other emotion, should not be allowed to dictate your actions to the point of self-sabotage." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "This isn't just about a grade. This is about you. You're smarter than this, aren't you?" Maya finally lifted her eyes, a flicker of surprise mixed with shame. I try to be." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But at home, it's hard to focus. My stepfather, he doesn't think school is important. He thinks I should get a job, help with the bills. My mom she just says I need to listen to him. She says I'm ungrateful for wanting more." The words spilled out, raw and uncontrolled, a dam breaking. Evelyn saw a glimpse of a familiar pattern, the subtle erosion of a young spirit, the constant battle against being made to feel small. She saw the ghost of her own past, suffocating under Arthur's passive-aggressive barbs, under Beatrice's insidious charm, under the societal expectation to simply behave. "Ungrateful," Evelyn's voice sharpened, but this time it was a different kind of edge, a protective one. Ungrateful for wanting a future, for wanting to learn. That's not ungrateful, Maya. That's ambition. That's survival. She pushed the essay aside, a dismissive flick of her wrist. Let me tell you something, Maya. Don't you ever let them make you small. Your mind is yours. It's the only thing truly yours. Use it like a weapon, or they'll take that too. Maya blinked, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. The words were harsh, unlike anything a teacher had ever said to her, but they resonated with a brutal truth. A weapon. Yes, Evelyn affirmed, her own experiences fueling the intensity in her eyes. A weapon against ignorance, against manipulation, against anyone who tries to diminish you. Don't just parrot what others say. Learn to dissect it. Learn to articulate your own truth, even if your voice shakes, especially if your voice shakes. She paused, a rare moment of vulnerability softening her gaze. I know what it feels like to feel trapped, to feel like your spirit is slowly being chipped away. Don't let them win. Fight back with your intelligence, with your words. Understand. Maya nodded, tears still flowing, but now with a strange mix of fear and dawning comprehension. Yes, Ms. Finch. Good. Evelyn stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the empty schoolyard. This essay will be given a chance to be rewritten, but it will be your words this time, and you will show me that you can use that mind of yours, not just to survive, but to truly thrive. She turned back, a ghost of her usual sardonic smirk playing on her lips. And if your stepfather has a problem with you studying, tell him Ms. Finch said he's underestimating the power of a well-read woman. That should give him pause. Maya actually managed a small, watery smile, a spark of something new in her eyes. It was a victory, small but significant, and Evelyn felt a warmth unfurl in her chest that had nothing to do with her usual detached satisfaction of a witty retort. This was different. This was hope. The very next day, hope felt like a distant, absurd concept, buried under the relentless sunshine and the suffocating gentility of the Green Grove Lawn Bowls Club. Beatrice had insisted, with a sickly sweet smile that dared Evelyn to refuse, that they join Arthur for his weekly gentleman's afternoon there. Evelyn, trapped, had found herself clad in what Beatrice approvingly called suitable attire, a pastel blouse and sensible trousers. Feeling like a prop in a suburban tableau, she desperately wanted to escape. The air hung thick with the smell of freshly mown grass, cheap white wine, and the cloying perfume of aged floral arrangements. Elderly men in pristine whites rolled polished bowls with an intensity usually reserved for life-or-death decisions, while their wives clucked approvingly from the sidelines, their conversation a monotonous drone of ailments, grandchildren, and thinly veiled gossip. Evelyn, perched uncomfortably on a white plastic chair, nursing a tepid glass of Chardonnay, felt a familiar wave of nausea wash over her. Every witty barb she concocted in her mind felt utterly useless here, bouncing off the impenetrable wall of suburban niceness. Arthur, oblivious, was deep in conversation with a man named Nigel, debating the finer points of a particularly impressive draw. Beatrice, however, was in her element. She fluttered between small groups, her frail fox act perfected, dispensing compliments and collecting snippets of information, all while ensuring Evelyn was kept within her sightlines. Such a lovely club, isn't it, dear? Beatrice chirped, reappearing at Evelyn's side, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Arthur and I have always found it so wholesome. She paused, taking a dainty sip of her sherry, her eyes scanning Evelyn's face with a predatory gleam. Though I suppose it's not for everyone. Some prefer more intellectual pursuits, or perhaps children. She allowed the last word to hang in the air, a perfectly timed, invisible dagger aimed directly at Evelyn's exposed heart. It was a well-worn jab, one that always landed, always found the tender spot of her childlessness, a perceived failure in her marriage. Evelyn felt the familiar clench in her gut, the instinct to withdraw, to shrink, to let the remark burrow deep and poison her. The air suddenly felt thinner, the drone of conversations receding into a dull roar. Her sharp tongue, usually her shield, felt heavy and useless. What could she say that wouldn't sound desperate, or worse, uncaring? She could feel the abuse shadow coiling around her, trying to pull her back into the suffocating silence, to make her small again. Just as the bitterness began to rise, threatening to choke her, Evelyn's gaze drifted across the greens, past Arthur's focused profile, past another huddle of chattering women. Her eyes landed on a woman sitting alone, a splash of vibrant, unapologetic magenta in a sea of beige and pastel. She had a riot of curly red hair escaping a straw hat, a pair of oversized cat-eye sunglasses perched on her nose, and was openly, unashamedly, eating a sausage roll with gusto, crumbs dusting her bright yellow linen dress. There was a joyful defiance in her posture, a complete lack of concern for the stiff-backed formality around her. The woman caught Evelyn's eye. Instead of looking away, she winked, a slow, conspiratorial blink that seemed to cut through the oppressive atmosphere. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the absurdity of it all. Evelyn felt a sudden, unexpected surge of something other than despair. It was indignation, yes, but also a glimmer of amusement. She looked at Beatrice, still hovering, a self-satisfied smirk on her lips, waiting for Evelyn's reaction to her cruel remark. Evelyn's tongue found its edge again, but this time it wasn't defensive, it was observational, a scalpel aimed not at a person, but at the ridiculous situation. "Yes, Beatrice," Evelyn said, her voice clear, cutting through the general murmur of the club. "It truly is quite wholesome. I imagine the conversations here could give a particularly potent sedative a run for its money. One might even describe it as an induced coma of contentment." She offered a saccharine smile that perfectly mimicked Beatrice's own. Such a soothing environment for those who prefer their thought processes to remain entirely undisturbed. The magenta-clad woman across the greens let out a sudden, loud burst of laughter, a genuinely raucous sound that turned several heads, including Beatrice's. Beatrice, caught off guard, spluttered, her artificial smile faltering. "Evelyn, really, dear, such a sharp tongue for such a quaint setting." Evelyn merely raised an eyebrow. "It's a gift, Beatrice, or perhaps a curse. Depends on the audience, wouldn't you say?" She met the magenta woman's gaze again, and this time both women shared a silent, knowing chuckle. The woman, now wiping crumbs from her mouth, stood up and strolled over, her gait an easy, confident swing. "Finally, a kindred spirit in this sea of beige bladders," she exclaimed, her voice rich and melodious. Brenda Carmichael, divorcée extraordinaire and connoisseur of fine pastries and even finer insults." She held out a hand, surprisingly strong and warm. "And you, my dear, possess a wit sharper than my ex-husband's alimony lawyer." Evelyn found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. Evelyn Finch, English teacher, currently serving time for crimes against blandness. She shook Brenda's hand. Beatrice, recovering her composure, interjected with a forced cough. "Brenda, dear, so lovely to see you. You know Evelyn, my daughter-in-law. She's quite particular." Brenda merely arched a magnificent eyebrow at Beatrice, a silent challenge in her eyes. "Particular? I'd call it discerning. A rare quality these days, wouldn't you agree, Evelyn? Especially when one is trapped in a vortex of predictable pleasantries and questionable fashion choices." She winked at Evelyn. "You know, I'm organizing a pub quiz next Tuesday at the Crucible of Reason. It's a bit of a local haunt, far less sedating. We could use a mind like yours. Or, if quizzes aren't your thing, there's a rather fabulous pottery class where we learn to sculpt our frustrations into surprisingly phallic vases. Either way, it promises more genuine laughs than this annual ode to beige." Evelyn stared at Brenda, a strange cocktail of shock and exhilaration coursing through her. An invitation, a genuine, unforced invitation to something else, something vibrant and unpredictable. It felt like a tiny crack in the perfectly manicured, suffocating wall around her. It was a lifeline, offered without judgment, without expectation, simply for the sheer pleasure of her company and her sharp mind. "A pub quiz, you say?" Evelyn mused, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "My general knowledge of archaic literary devices and obscure historical footnotes might finally find its true calling." She glanced at Beatrice, whose face had now settled into a tight, disapproving mask. "Consider me intrigued, Brenda, very intrigued indeed." Brenda clapped her hands together, a sound like cymbals in the hushed environment. "Excellent! I'll text you the details. Prepare to have your mind stimulated and your taste buds properly challenged. No induced comas, I promise." She winked once more, then turned, and with a final, mischievous glance at Beatrice, sauntered away, leaving a lingering scent of independence and a powerful sense of possibility in her wake. Evelyn watched her go, a genuine laugh bubbling up, surprising even herself. The bitterness hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been momentarily eclipsed by something bright and unfamiliar. A connection. A potential ally. Her gaze drifted to Arthur, still engrossed in his bowls, utterly oblivious to the quiet revolution stirring beside him. He wouldn't understand. But then, for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn realized she didn't care if he did. The thought was liberating, a small, fierce whisper of defiance in the quiet chaos of her mind. The pub quiz. A place where her words could be a bridge, not just a weapon. And as she imagined the conversation she might have there, the thought of the dinner party Beatrice had planned for next week, an event Evelyn had been dreading with every fiber of her being, suddenly felt less like an impending doom and more like a necessary obstacle to navigate before she could truly taste this nascent freedom. The battlefield might be set, but Evelyn felt a surprising, exhilarating spark of readiness. She finally had something to fight for. The laughter with Brenda, the quiet camaraderie in Maya's determined eyes, the nascent warmth that had begun to thaw the edges of Evelyn's meticulously frozen heart. It all dissipated the moment she stepped back into the sterile perfection of her home. The air, usually scentless, now carried the cloying perfume of Beatrice's potpourri and the faint, unsettling aroma of simmering resentment. Brenda's offer of a pottery class, a genuine invitation to a world where mess was embraced, seemed a distant, foolish fantasy. Here, mess was a betrayal, a transgression against the fragile peace Arthur maintained with an unspoken, oppressive insistence. "Evelyn, darling, there you are," Beatrice chirped from the living room, her voice a saccharine bell that grated on Evelyn's nerves. "Arthur and I were just discussing the menu for next Tuesday. Mr. Henderson simply adores my lamb, and his wife, poor dear, is quite particular about presentation." Evelyn dropped her keys onto the pristine porcelain dish in the entryway with a fraction more force than necessary, the small clatter echoing like a protest in the hushed house. "Dinner party, Beatrice? I wasn't aware." Arthur, perched on the edge of the sofa, looked up from his tablet, a faint wrinkle of annoyance marring his otherwise placid brow. "Mother mentioned it last night. I thought you heard." He offered a weak, placating smile that did little to smooth the sudden tension. "It's important for work, Evelyn. Henderson is key to the new account." Evelyn felt the familiar clench in her stomach. Beatrice had learned. Her initial attempts at outright, obvious sabotage had been clumsy, easily thwarted. Now she moved with the stealth of a seasoned sniper, hitting Evelyn where it hurt most. Her meticulous control, her professional reputation, her very identity as mistress of her home. The library volunteer stunt, where Beatrice had subtly undermined Evelyn's authority to Miss Pendleton, had shown her the new battlefield. This dinner party, then, was to be a public execution. "Of course, Arthur. How remiss of me to not absorb vital social information through osmosis," Evelyn retorted, her voice as sharp as a newly honed blade, yet tinged with a weariness that only Arthur, if he bothered to listen, would detect. "What culinary delights has Mother planned that I, presumably, will be executing?" Beatrice beamed, a theatrical display of maternal warmth. "Oh, just a few old family recipes, dear. Arthur's favorites. Lamb with rosemary and garlic, my famous gratin dauphinois, and a lovely trifle for dessert. Nothing too strenuous for you, I promise. I'll be here to supervise, of course." The last word, supervise, hung in the air, coated in poison. The next few days blurred into a purgatory of forced collaboration. Beatrice, with her perpetually helpful presence, transformed Evelyn's kitchen from a sanctuary of precise efficiency into a minefield of misplaced ingredients and unsolicited advice. Evelyn, a woman who prized order and meticulous preparation, found herself constantly battling invisible forces. The first casualty was her mise en place. Evelyn would painstakingly chop vegetables, separating them into neat bowls, only to find them mysteriously recombined or worse, corrected by Beatrice. "Oh, dear Evelyn, you've put the shallots with the onions. They simply must be separate for the proper caramelization, you know. I fixed it for you, don't worry." Evelyn would stare at the now muddled heap, her jaw tight, knowing a biting retort would only fuel Beatrice's self-righteous glow. Then there was the seasoning incident. Evelyn had a delicate hand with herbs, a nuanced palate refined over years of quiet, solitary cooking. Beatrice, however, believed in a more robust approach. "A pinch more salt, dear. No, that is barely a whisper. One must be decisive. Here, let mother show you." And before Evelyn could protest, a heavy-handed sprinkle would descend, often accompanied by a performative sniff and a satisfied nod. Evelyn would then spend precious minutes attempting to salvage the dish. Her internal monologue, a string of increasingly colorful expletives. Arthur was predictably useless. He'd occasionally wander into the kitchen, sniff the air appreciatively, and remark, "Smells good, ladies, hard at work, I see." His blissful ignorance was a deliberate weapon, a shield he held up against any hint of domestic discord. When Evelyn tried to explain Beatrice, "Help," he'd wave a dismissive hand. "She's just trying to be involved, Evelyn. It's her way. She misses having a kitchen to command." He'd laugh, a hollow, empty sound, and retreat to his tablet, leaving Evelyn to fight her silent war alone. The lamb, Evelyn's particular pride, became a battleground. Beatrice insisted on a specific brand of inferior stock, claiming it was traditional. Evelyn's carefully selected cut of meat, left to marinate overnight, was found rearranged in a way that would hinder even cooking. By the time the dinner party arrived, Evelyn felt less like a chef and more like a harried stagehand, desperately trying to keep the play from collapsing. Her pristine home, once a comfort, felt like a pressure cooker. Guests arrived promptly at 7. Mr. Henderson, Arthur's perpetually jovial boss, boomed greetings. His wife, Mrs. Henderson, a woman Evelyn had always found insufferable, offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Beatrice's two cronies, Mrs. Albright and Mrs. Davies, arrived next, their perfume clashing with Beatrice's potpourri and Evelyn's simmering rage. The polite chatter began, a carefully orchestrated symphony of social graces that Evelyn found herself barely able to tolerate. Arthur, predictably, was in his element, holding court with Mr. Henderson, his arm casually draped over Beatrice's shoulder. Beatrice, looking every inch the benevolent matriarch, preened under his attention. Evelyn, meanwhile, moved through the house, a phantom hostess, pouring wine, fetching appetizers, her mind already cataloging the subtle ways Beatrice had sabotaged the evening. The artfully arranged crudités were wilting. The cheese board Evelyn had carefully curated was missing its imported blue, replaced by a bland cheddar. Dinner was served, a tense ballet of forced smiles and clinking cutlery. The lamb, despite Evelyn's best efforts to counterseason Beatrice's heavy hand, was disappointingly salty. The gratin dauphinois, which Evelyn had known would be a starchy mess after Beatrice's adjustments, clung stubbornly to the serving spoon. Mrs. Henderson picked at her plate with a delicate, critical air. "This lamb is certainly robust, isn't it?" Mrs. Henderson offered, her voice dripping with passive judgment. Beatrice, ever quick, leaned forward, a conspiratorial twinkle in her eye. "Oh, it's Arthur's favorite. Though in fairness, Evelyn is a schoolteacher, not a chef. One can't expect her to have the flair of a seasoned homemaker, can one?" She patted Arthur's arm. "My Arthur, he's so understanding, bless him. He knows I'm getting on, so he ensures Evelyn takes on the bulk of the heavy lifting." A flush crept up Evelyn's neck. She felt her sharp retort, a perfectly calibrated verbal parry forming on her tongue. "Yes, Beatrice, and you've become quite adept at lifting only your fork to your mouth." But she bit it back. Not yet. The audience wasn't primed. Arthur, ever oblivious, chuckled. "Mother, always been the expert, Evelyn. Can't blame her for trying to guide you." The conversation drifted, a placid river of polite inanities, until Beatrice, with a theatrical sigh, declared, "Oh, that reminds me of dear Evelyn's early days with us. A truly charming anecdote." She turned to the table, her eyes glinting with malicious glee. "You know, Evelyn was quite the force in the classroom even then. So bright, so opinionated." She paused for effect, ensuring all eyes were on Evelyn. Evelyn felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She knew this game. This was Beatrice's specialty, the charming story designed to eviscerate. "Arthur always said she had a sharp tongue," Beatrice continued, a simpering smile plastered on her face. "And goodness, he wasn't wrong. But sometimes, that sharp tongue can cut more than just words." She gave a small, exaggerated sniff. "I remember, just after she and Arthur married, I was trying to teach her a few things about domesticity. She was quite new to it, you see. Never had much practice, busy with her books." She chuckled, a dry, papery sound, and the two cronies joined in with a synchronized titter. Arthur, beside her, offered a fond, indulgent laugh, his eyes fixed on his mother, completely blind to the silent agony etched on Evelyn's face. "I was showing her how to polish the silver," Beatrice went on, her voice laced with feigned exasperation, and she was, well, let's just say, distracted. She was muttering about some student's essay, I think, and she managed to, well, she completely ruined my great-grandmother's silver locket, a family heirloom, mind you, a priceless piece. She shook her head sadly. And when I pointed it out, she just said, "Oh, do forgive me, Beatrice." My mind was on matters of actual intellectual substance, not tarnished trinkets. Imagine. The cronies gasped in unison, their eyes wide with mock horror. Mrs. Henderson offered a sympathetic cluck. Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable, sensing the underlying nastiness. Arthur, however, laughed again, a little too loudly, patting his mother's hand. "Oh, Evelyn, you always were a bit of a bull in a china shop when it came to domestic arts, weren't you?" The words hit Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. Not the fabricated story itself. She barely remembered the locket, a cheap, gaudy thing Beatrice had insisted she clean, but Arthur's casual, complicit dismissal. The way he laughed. The way he sided with his mother, as he always did, making Evelyn the butt of the joke, the unfeminine, intellectual woman incapable of the simple graces of a wife. It wasn't just the locket. It was the sum total of every microaggression, every passive-aggressive jab, every subtle erasure of her worth. The laughter died down, replaced by an awkward silence. Evelyn felt a strange, cold calm descend upon her. The tightness in her chest, the years of suppressed rage, suddenly solidified into an unyielding clarity. She looked at Arthur, then at Beatrice, then at the horrified faces of the guests. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply done. Evelyn slowly, deliberately, placed her linen napkin beside her plate. The small, rustling sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the dining room. She pushed back her chair, the legs scraping faintly against the polished floor. Every eye was on her. She stood, not dramatically, but with an almost chilling composure, her posture ramrod straight. "Oh, Evelyn, dear, are you quite all right?" Beatrice asked, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. The wolf, for a moment, saw the glint of a hunter's trap. Evelyn turned her gaze to Beatrice, a slow, predatory smile touching her lips. "Never better, Beatrice. In fact, I'm feeling remarkably clear." She swept her eyes across the room, taking in Mr. Henderson's discomfort, Mrs. Henderson's thinly veiled superiority, and the cronies' avid curiosity. "Beatrice was just sharing a charming anecdote," Evelyn began, her voice low, measured, carrying through the room with a new, dangerous authority, "about my early days of domestic ineptitude. And indeed, she's quite right. I was, and perhaps still am, a bull in a china shop. But it seems I wasn't the only one shattering delicate things." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "You see," Evelyn continued, addressing the room, "Beatrice's memory, while vivid, often suffers from a peculiar affliction. It tends to reframe inconvenient truths. It wasn't a precious locket that day, Beatrice. It was my self-esteem. And you weren't merely teaching me to polish silver. You were teaching me my place. A place, incidentally, that Arthur here was only too happy for me to occupy." She gestured to Arthur with a sardonic flick of her wrist. Arthur blanched. "Evelyn, what are you talking about?" She ignored him, her gaze fixed on Beatrice. "For years, I believed that my sharp tongue, as Arthur so affectionately calls it, was merely a defense mechanism. A shield against the relentless, subtle erosion of my spirit orchestrated by a woman who finds joy in making others small, and a man who is too cowardly to ever truly stand for anything, least of all his wife." Mrs. Henderson gasped, a tiny, choked sound. "I've learned, however," Evelyn went on, a glint entering her eye, "that a sharp tongue can also be a scalpel, and tonight, it seems, is the night for surgery." Her smile widened, devoid of warmth. "Let's start with the patient, shall we? This pristine home, for instance. It's not a home, it's a mausoleum. Every cushion plumped, every surface gleaming, a monument to the joyless perfection Arthur demands, and a testament to the life I've been performing for the past 2 decades. She turned to Arthur, her eyes cutting through his pathetic attempts at outrage. Arthur, you claim to value my intellect, my wit. Yet, every time I dared to use it for anything other than a polite social parry, you recoiled. You preferred me mute, or better yet, a mirror for your mother's endless, toxic reflections. Your wife, a highly educated woman, has been reduced to a glorified house cleaner and an audience for your mother's theatrical manipulations, all while you sip your scotch and pretend not to notice the blood on the carpet. Arthur stammered. Evelyn, you're hysterical. The Hendersons are here. Mother, she's not well. Oh, I assure you, Arthur, I've never been clearer, Evelyn retorted, her voice rising slightly, now infused with a thrilling, liberating power. And as for Mother Beatrice, your performance tonight, dear, was exquisite. The frail fox, wounded by the bull in the china shop. Truly a masterclass in weaponized incompetence. One almost forgets that you single-handedly ruined the lamb with excess salt, ensured the gratin was inedible by replacing my cheese, and subtly removed the actual artisan selection from the appetizers, replacing it with the cheapest supermarket variety, presumably to subtly reinforce my domestic ineptitude. Beatrice's jaw dropped, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Her face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Evelyn Finch, how dare you? How dare I? Evelyn's laughter was a brittle, sharp sound. Darling Beatrice, after years of being gaslighted into thinking I was the crazy one, the ungrateful one, the cold one, after watching you meticulously dismantle my life piece by piece, you truly think I still care about your delicate sensibilities? She shook her head, a slow, deliberate gesture. No, the show is over, and I'm no longer playing the victim. She stepped away from the table, walking towards the living room, her voice now a powerful crescendo. Arthur's boss, Mr. Henderson, perhaps you'll find my sudden candor refreshing, or perhaps you'll find it unprofessional. Either way, it's the truth, and after years of polite fictions, the truth is rather liberating. As for you, Mrs. Henderson, I hope your marriage is a touch more authentic. She reached the entryway, where her keys still lay on the porcelain dish. She picked them up, the cool metal a grounding weight in her palm. She looked back at the stunned faces, frozen in various states of shock and embarrassment. Arthur was on his feet, his face pale with rage. Beatrice clutched her chest, her eyes narrowed slits of hatred. Oh, and Arthur, Evelyn called out, her voice echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the house, a final, perfectly aimed shot. Do try to remember which wine fork is for stabbing. You never did quite grasp the nuances of proper tableware, did you? Much like the nuances of a functioning marriage. With that, Evelyn Finch, a woman reborn in the crucible of her own wit, turned on her heel and walked out the front door, leaving the suffocating perfection of her old life and its stunned inhabitants behind her. The click of the lock was a definitive punctuation mark, a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. The night air, cool and crisp, had never tasted so sweet. The silence in the dining room had been so absolute, so heavy, it felt as though the very air had congealed, trapping the shocked breaths of Arthur's boss and Beatrice's cronies. Evelyn, after delivering her exquisite vivisection of their domestic charade, had not waited for a response. She simply turned on her heel, the delicate clink of her low heels on the polished parquet the only sound in the suffocating quiet. She walked past the pristine, untouched buffet, the crystal gleam of which now seemed to mock the wreckage she'd left behind, and into the living room, where the lingering scent of Beatrice's sickly sweet potpourri usually filled her with a familiar dread. Tonight, it felt like victory. She hadn't reached the archway leading to the hallway when Arthur's roar shattered the fragile peace. Evelyn, what in God's name was that? He stormed in, his face a mottled purple, veins throbbing at his temples, his usually meticulously combed hair now slightly disheveled. He looked, for the first time in years, truly ungoverned. It was almost comical, a man accustomed to subtle manipulations finally reduced to sputtering, visceral rage. Evelyn turned slowly, her expression as unreadable as polished obsidian. It was a statement, Arthur, she said, her voice low and even, a stark contrast to his bluster. One I believe I've been building towards for the better part of a decade. A statement. You humiliated me. You insulted my mother, our guests, my boss, Evelyn. Do you have any idea the professional repercussions of your derangement? He gesticulated wildly, his hands shaking. He looked pathetic, but the sight stirred nothing in her but a cool, analytical detachment. The fear was gone, stripped away by the sheer, exhilarating audacity of her own words. The humiliation she had endured for so long, the slow, insidious erosion, had finally boiled over, incinerating the last vestiges of her timidity. What was left was cold, hard resolve. Derangement? Evelyn lifted an eyebrow, a flicker of her old sharpness returning, but this time it felt surgical. Or perhaps, finally, clarity, you wouldn't recognize it, of course. It doesn't come neatly packaged in a sigh or a passive-aggressive suggestion. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, but she didn't flinch. You will go back in there, Evelyn, and you will apologize. To my mother, to my boss, to everyone you've offended. Now, or you can pack your bags. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper, meant to sound like a threat, but to Evelyn it sounded like an offer. Face an uncertain future, Evelyn. Do you truly want that? A small, imperceptible smile touched Evelyn's lips. Uncertain future. Her mind echoed the words, not with dread, but with a surprising lightness. Neither do I. The ultimatum wasn't a punishment. It was the precise, perfectly timed exit cue she had unwittingly craved. It was the key to her gilded cage, handed to her on a silver platter, albeit one currently smeared with the metaphorical detritus of a ruined dinner party and a ruined marriage. Neither do I, Arthur, she said, her voice still calm, almost serene. Her gaze held his, unwavering. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a baffled confusion. He had expected tears, defiance, a witty parry she could win. He hadn't expected this quiet, unnerving acceptance. He had, as always, underestimated her. Without another word, Evelyn walked past him, her movements fluid and decisive. The formal living room, once a stage for her meticulous performance, now felt like a mere passageway. She ascended the grand staircase, its polished banister cold beneath her fingers, not towards oblivion, but towards a new beginning. She could hear the murmurs from the dining room, Beatrice's hushed, dramatic tones, Arthur's bewildered attempts at damage control. None of it touched her. She closed the door to her bedroom, the soft click a definitive punctuation mark on a sentence that had been years in the writing. She didn't bother turning on the main light. The moonlight, filtering through the immaculate bay window, cast the room in soft, silver hues, illuminating the meticulously made bed, the antique dresser, the stack of unread novels on her nightstand. This room, too, had been a cage, albeit one she had decorated herself. Tonight, it would be her war room. Evelyn retrieved her laptop from the discreet drawer in her nightstand, the glow of the screen a beacon in the dim room. Her fingers, usually so precise with gratting pens or the delicate stem of a wine glass, moved with an uncharacteristic urgency across the keyboard. Small apartments for rent, independent living, financial planning for divorcees. The words, once unthinkable, now flowed freely, a current of fierce, undeniable purpose. Each click was a small act of rebellion, each search result a brick in the foundation of her nascent freedom. She found a bank that allowed online account opening with minimal fuss. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Her current accounts were joint with Arthur, a tangled web of shared responsibility that had felt like financial handcuffs. Now, as she typed in her personal details, selected a savings account, and initiated a small initial transfer from a forgotten inheritance fund, a jolt of exhilarating power coursed through her. This wasn't Arthur's money or Beatrice's. It was hers. A secret, inviolable stash, a symbol of her burgeoning autonomy. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The fear of an uncertain future, which Arthur had so smugly wielded, dissolved into the quiet hum of the laptop. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time it was hers to sculpt. And that, she realized, was not terrifying, it was profoundly liberating. She spent hours poring over listings, comparing rents, scrutinizing photographs. She zoomed in on kitchenettes, imagined herself in sun-drenched living rooms that barely fit a sofa, and considered the proximity to public transport. The stark contrast between these modest spaces and her sprawling, joyless house was not a deterrent. It was an invitation. Each small apartment, with its quirky angles and limited storage, felt less like a downgrade and more like a canvas. A fresh, blank canvas for a life unburdened by performance. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Arthur had likely gone to work early, nursing his bruised ego and the fallout from the dinner party. Beatrice, Evelyn imagined, was probably luxuriating in her victimhood, sipping chamomile tea and plotting her next move. Evelyn moved through the pristine kitchen, ignoring the subtle rearrangement of her spice rack, the misplaced coffee filters. She made herself a strong, black coffee, savoring the bitter taste, a stark antidote to the cloying sweetness of her old life. Her phone buzzed, Brenda's name flashing on the screen. Evelyn hesitated for a split second, then answered. "Evelyn Finch, my dear woman, you were magnificent. Truly a performance for the ages." Brenda's boisterous voice, usually a little overwhelming, was today a comforting balm. Arthur's face, oh, the sheer, unadulterated bewilderment. And Beatrice, bless her shriveled heart, looked like a cat that had just swallowed a particularly spiky goldfish. My new favorite memory, right up there with the time I convinced my ex-husband his toupee was a rare species of squirrel. Evelyn actually laughed, a genuine, unforced sound that felt foreign and wonderful. "Brenda, you're incorrigible. And you, my love, are unleashed. So the question remains, what now? Did Arthur finally grow a pair and offer you the boot, or did you simply float away on a cloud of righteous indignation?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "He gave me an ultimatum, apologize to his mother or pack my bags." "And you said?" "I said, neither do I, Arthur." There was a pause on Brenda's end, then a whoop of triumph that vibrated Evelyn's ear. "Yes, my queen, I knew it. So the bags, are they metaphorical or are we talking actual Samsonites?" "Actual Samsonites eventually. I've already started researching apartments. Opened a new bank account." The words tumbled out, faster than she'd intended, but with a liberating ease. It was a secret she hadn't realized she was desperate to share. "Good for you. Don't you dare look back, not even for a backward glance at the wreckage. It's glorious. You deserve every inch of this, Evelyn. Every single, blessed, independent inch." Brenda's voice, for all its usual theatricality, was laced with a deep, genuine sincerity that touched Evelyn profoundly. "What do you need? A place to crash, a getaway car, a distraction while you spirit away your more precious belongings? I'm your woman. I've orchestrated several grand exits in my time. I once moved out of a shared holiday home in the middle of the night, leaving only a note written on a cocktail napkin and a very confused gecko." Evelyn smiled, a soft, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Brenda. Honestly, just knowing I have someone in my corner, someone who actually sees what's happening." "Oh, I see it, all right. Clear as day. Arthur's a jellyfish in a man's suit, and Beatrice is a beautifully poisoned viper. You're a magnificent hawk, Evelyn, and it's time you flew. Keep me updated. I have a feeling this is going to be far more entertaining than any of my ex-husband's melodramas." Later that week, back in the familiar, comforting chaos of the high school, Evelyn felt a new spring in her step. The sterile perfection of her home had been replaced by a nascent excitement for the imperfect, authentic future. This newfound energy wasn't just for herself. It radiated outwards. It settled, unexpectedly, on Maya. She found Maya hunched over a laptop in the library, brows furrowed in concentration. The scholarship application forms lay scattered around her, a formidable pile of aspirations and anxieties. Evelyn sat opposite her, a gentle but firm presence. "How are those essays coming along, Maya?" Maya jumped, startled, then quickly minimized the screen, a telltale sign of insecurity. "Oh, Ms. Finch, they're slow. I just don't know what to write. How to make myself sound worthy." Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze piercing yet kind. "Worthy of what, Maya? A scholarship? A future? You are worthy. The challenge is not to sound worthy, but to be truly, unequivocally yourself on that page. To articulate your unique voice, not the voice you think they want to hear." She remembered her own careful performances, the layers of wit that masked her true feelings. She wouldn't let Maya make the same mistake. "But it's so hard," Maya whispered, her eyes brimming with a familiar frustration Evelyn recognized from her own past. "My mom says I should just stick to what's safe, not talk about too much. About our situation. She says it's embarrassing." Evelyn felt a surge of protectiveness, a powerful empathy. Don't you ever let them make you small. The words she'd spoken to Maya weeks ago, words born of her own buried pain, resonated now with a fresh, defiant clarity. Your situation, Maya, Evelyn began, her voice steady, is part of your story. It doesn't make you less worthy, it makes you resilient. It gives you perspective. You have a sharp mind, I've seen it. Don't let anyone, especially not someone who thinks shame is a useful tool, dull your edge. Use your intelligence not to hide, but to illuminate your truth, to make them understand, to make them listen. She pulled Maya's laptop closer, opening the minimized document. Show me. What have you written so far? Let's take that sharp mind of yours and turn it into something undeniable. Something that screams, I am here, and I am ready to seize my future on my own terms. For the next few weeks, Evelyn dedicated herself to Maya's scholarship essays with a fierce, almost zealous intensity. They met during lunch breaks, after school, even exchanging emails late into the evening. Evelyn helped Maya dissect her experiences, unearth her true motivations, and craft narratives that were not just eloquent, but authentic. She challenged Maya to push past her fear of judgment, to articulate the subtle nuances of her challenging home life, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a testament to her strength and determination. Maya, initially hesitant, slowly began to unfurl, her words gaining a clarity and power that mirrored Evelyn's own burgeoning liberation. Watching Maya blossom under her guidance, Evelyn found a profound, unexpected satisfaction. It was a tangible act of building, of empowering, a stark contrast to the years she had spent dismantling herself, one sarcastic remark at a time, within the confines of her sterile marriage. In the quiet hours after Maya left, Evelyn continued her meticulous planning. The folders on her laptop grew, filled with budgets, apartment listings, and checklists. She discreetly began packing a small bag with essentials, hidden at the back of her closet. She consolidated important documents, making copies, securing them. The process was not frantic, but methodical, almost ritualistic. She was constructing her escape with the precision of a master architect. One evening, Arthur returned home, a dark cloud of unspoken resentment clinging to him. He found Evelyn in the living room, calmly reading a book, a small smile playing on her lips as she underlined a passage. He said nothing of the dinner party, nothing of an apology. He simply offered a terse, "Good evening," and retreated to his study. Evelyn merely nodded, her gaze returning to her book. His silence, once a weapon of control, was now merely the muted background noise of a life she was actively, meticulously dismantling. She was ready, almost. The fear was a distant echo replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation. She looked around the opulent living room at the expensive art and the imported furniture. It all felt like a costume, and she was finally ready to step off the stage. The next move, she knew, would be swift, definitive, and entirely on her own terms. She closed her book, a subtle tremor of excitement running through her. The act was set, the stage was lit, and Evelyn Finch was about to make her final, unscripted exit. The silence in the meticulously ordered living room was not the familiar, heavy, quiet Evelyn had grown accustomed to, the kind that settled like dust on neglected furniture, dulling every surface. This was a charged, anticipatory silence, humming with an almost physical presence, like a storm front building behind a deceptively clear sky. Arthur sat rigidly on the cream-colored sofa, his hands clasped over a stack of glossy apartment brochures, his usually placid face contorted into a mask of wounded betrayal. Opposite him, in her favorite armchair, Beatrice sat like a porcelain doll, her delicate hands folded, a single, perfectly timed tear tracing a path down her powdered cheek. The air, usually redolent with Evelyn's chosen blend of lavender and vanilla, was now thick with an unspoken accusation. Evelyn, still in her teaching clothes, felt none of the usual reflexive dread. For weeks, the clandestine thrill of her planning had been a private fire, a quiet rebellion burning beneath the surface of her placid existence. She had meticulously researched, secretly saved, and dared to dream. Now the dream was exposed, raw and vulnerable, yet strangely, the fear that should have choked her was absent. Instead, a cold, crystalline resolve settled in her chest, sharp and bracing. "Evelyn," Arthur began, his voice a low, tremulous rumble, "perhaps you'd like to explain these." He fanned the brochures across the coffee table, a scattering of colorful, vibrant pictures of modest, modern apartments, anathema to the stately, sterile grandeur of their current home. Each image, a beacon of her secret hope, now felt like a spotlight on her supposed transgression. Beatrice sniffed delicately, a sound barely audible, yet perfectly designed to draw attention to her suffering. "Arthur is quite upset, dear. We found them quite by accident, you understand, while dusting your writing desk. Such lovely views, though, very compact." Her gaze, usually sharp and penetrating despite her feigned frailty, was now softened with a practiced pity, a predatory gleam hidden beneath. Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, her posture relaxed, almost casual, betraying nothing of the internal shift that had occurred. She observed them, truly observed them, perhaps for the first time in years. Arthur, the overgrown boy, perpetually seeking his mother's approval, perpetually avoiding any genuine conflict. Beatrice, the maestro of manipulation, orchestrating scenes of domestic drama with the precision of a seasoned conductor. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, not with a burst of anger, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. "Accident, of course," Evelyn replied, her voice steady, devoid of the defensive edge that had once been her default. "And compact is certainly one way to describe independence, wouldn't you say, Beatrice? After all, one can't exactly fit an entire museum of resentment into a 2-bedroom rental." Arthur flinched, but Beatrice merely dabbed her eye with a lace handkerchief, shaking her head. "Such a sharp tongue, Evelyn, always. And after all Arthur has done for you, for us, this beautiful home, the security, he's been so worried." "Worried about what precisely?" Evelyn pushed off the doorframe, taking a slow, deliberate step into the room. The scent of fear and accusation clung to the heavy drapes, the expensive upholstery, the very air she had once found so suffocating. "That I might finally learn to breathe without your permission." Arthur finally abandoned the brochures, rising slowly, his shoulders stiff with indignation. "Evelyn, this is completely out of line, to even think about leaving after everything. Mother is beside herself. She thinks she's done something wrong." He glanced at Beatrice, who offered a fragile, mournful nod, her lower lip trembling just so. "Done something wrong," Evelyn repeated, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Beatrice, you haven't done anything wrong, as such. You've simply been you, a force of nature, or perhaps a force of meticulously planned domestic sabotage. Take your pick." Beatrice let out a small, wounded gasp. "Evelyn, such unkindness to an old woman, you know how delicate my heart is. The stress, Arthur, dear, are you all right? All this talk, I feel quite faint." She pressed her hand to her chest, her fingers splayed dramatically, her eyes fluttering. It was the familiar performance, the trump card she had played countless times to deflect, to control, to ensure Arthur's unquestioning loyalty. It was the exact move Evelyn had anticipated, the one she had braced herself for, mentally dissecting its components over sleepless nights. Arthur was instantly at her side, his arm around her, his face etched with genuine concern. "Mother, please, lie down. Evelyn, look what you've done. You're upsetting her." His voice rose, tinged with anger and panic. "She can't handle this. She's too frail. And frankly, Evelyn, who would look after her if you were to go?" He looked from his mother's pale, artfully suffering face to Evelyn, the implied burden heavy in his tone. "She needs us. I need you, Evelyn, to keep things running, to manage everything." The words hung in the air, weighted with years of unspoken truth. "I need you to manage everything. Meaning, I need you to handle the life I'm too weak to build, the responsibilities I'm too passive to bear, and the emotional labor I'm too stunted to perform." Evelyn saw it, clear as day. Arthur wasn't appealing to her love, but to her utility. She was a valuable appliance, a well-oiled machine in the house of Arthur and Beatrice, and they could not fathom its smooth operation without her. The thought, instead of stinging, merely confirmed her conviction. "Arthur, darling," Beatrice whispered, her eyes still closed, but her voice held a thread of unexpected steel. "Don't be so hard on Evelyn, she's just emotional. It's been a stressful few weeks. Perhaps she's not quite herself." She opened her eyes, fixing Evelyn with a gaze that was suddenly clear, devoid of feigned pain. "You've been quite erratic, haven't you, Evelyn? Distracted, not your usual meticulous self." Arthur seized upon the cue. "Exactly. I've noticed it too, snapping at me over nothing, leaving things untidy. You're not well, Evelyn, you're stressed clearly. All these plans, you must be overwrought." He advanced slowly, his voice dropping to a falsely soothing tone, an insidious attempt to wrap her in a narrative of her own instability. This isn't you. You're hysterical. Let's just put these foolish notions aside. We'll talk about it when you've calmed down, when you're thinking clearly again. Evelyn watched them, a husband and his mother, a perfectly choreographed dance of manipulation and gaslighting, a routine they had perfected over years to keep her precisely where they wanted her, quiet, compliant, and doubting her own sanity. She had once bristled, fought back with her wit, her words flying like poison darts, but those darts had merely reinforced their belief in her difficult nature, never penetrating the thick skin of their denial. Now the old anger was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. Her mind, sharp and keen, felt like a perfectly honed blade, ready for a final, decisive cut. She took another step, then another, until she was standing directly in front of them, commanding the center of the room. Her gaze swept over Arthur's anxious face, then locked onto Beatrice's, which, despite the feigned frailty, held a flicker of triumph, a smug certainty that she had won. "No," Evelyn said, her voice quiet, but it resonated with a power that cut through the manufactured tension. "I'm not hysterical, Arthur. I am, in fact, remarkably clear. And you, Beatrice, are not delicate. You are a master strategist." Beatrice's thin lips tightened, the smile vanishing. Arthur's brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion battling his indignation. "For years," Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength, each word deliberate, "I believed my wit was my greatest defense, my sharp tongue a shield, but I was wrong. It was a tool, yes, but I wielded it defensively, reactively against the subtle, insidious currents you both perfected." She paused, her eyes lingering on Arthur, then Beatrice. "You, Arthur, with your passive-aggressive drip, your quiet sighs, your perpetual disappointment disguised as concern. You never needed to say a harsh word. Your very presence was a constant, low-grade erosion." Arthur opened his mouth, but Evelyn held up a hand, and for the first time he actually paused, caught off guard by her unflinching directness. "And you, Beatrice," Evelyn said, turning her full attention to the older woman, whose facade was finally beginning to crack, revealing a flicker of raw anger beneath. "You, my dear, have taken it to an art form. You are not frail. You are not forgetful. You are not incompetent. You are profoundly, dazzlingly, strategically incompetent. You've weaponized helplessness, painting yourself as the victim to control everyone around you. You've used your age as armor, your supposed fragility as a weapon, twisting affection into obligation, and guilt into absolute power." Beatrice gasped again, this time a genuine sound of shock and outrage. Her hand fell from her chest. "How dare you, Evelyn? After everything, the sacrifices Arthur makes." "Sacrifices?" Evelyn scoffed, a genuine, mirthless laugh escaping her lips. "Arthur sacrifices nothing. He exists in a state of suspended animation, perfectly preserved in the amber of your doting complicity. He's a puppet, Beatrice, and you're the puppeteer with invisible strings, dancing him through a life designed entirely for your comfort and control. My erratic behavior, my distraction. That was me slowly, painfully, waking up from the nightmare of your perfect, sterile reality." She walked to the window, the perfectly clean glass reflecting her own image, unburdened. "This house," she swept her hand, encompassing the entire pristine, stifling space. "It was never a home. It was a museum, a monument to unfulfilled potential, to unspoken resentments, to a life meticulously curated to avoid any speck of real, messy, glorious human emotion." Evelyn turned back, her eyes shining not with tears but with a fierce, defiant light. "Beatrice, you've managed to weaponize incompetence into an art form. Every mistake, every misplaced item, every feigned illness, it was all designed to keep Arthur tethered, to keep me distracted, to keep your reign absolute. But the show is over." Her gaze sharpened, piercing the older woman's remaining defenses. "It's over, Beatrice. Your audience has left." She then turned to Arthur, his face now a mask of bewildered fury. A child finally seeing the edges of his mother's manipulation, but not yet willing to accept his own part in the charade. "And Arthur," Evelyn continued, her voice softening but with a chilling finality that was far more devastating than anger, "you're not a husband. You're not a partner. You're a ticket taker at your mother's museum. You've stood by, collected the admissions, and admired the exhibits while your own life and mine crumbled into dust around us." Her words were precise, unsparing, each one a scalpel's cut through the layers of denial and evasion. You didn't just enable her. You reveled in the quiet comfort of her control, because it meant you never had to be truly responsible for anything, especially not yourself. The silence that followed was profound, thick with the weight of shattered illusions. Arthur visibly recoiled, as if physically struck, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Beatrice, for once, was speechless, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and genuine, unadulterated fear. Her power had always relied on the unsaid, the subtly implied, the gaslit doubt. Evelyn had named it, stripped it bare, and held it up to the harsh light of truth. "I'm done being an exhibit," Evelyn declared, her voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the room, leaving no room for argument, no space for rebuttal. She walked towards the hallway, her steps light, purposeful. Her pre-packed bag, a sturdy duffel that held only essentials, sat discreetly by the front door, a silent testament to her weeks of careful planning. She reached down, her fingers closing around the worn handle, the familiar weight a comforting assurance of her imminent freedom. She straightened, slinging the bag over her shoulder with an ease that spoke volumes. She didn't look back again at Arthur and Beatrice, frozen in their tableau of shock and defeat. She had said all she needed to say. The sharp tongue, once a desperate shield, then a bitter plea, had finally become what it was always meant to be. A scalpel of truth, dissecting the rot, liberating not just herself, but the space for a future she would finally sculpt on her own terms. The door, heavy with years of unspoken words, opened with a soft click. The words still hung in the air, a final, surgical strike against years of suffocating pretense. "You're not a husband. You're a ticket taker at your mother's museum. I'm done being an exhibit." The echo of her own voice, steady and devoid of even a tremor, gave Evelyn a peculiar jolt of clarity. She had meant every syllable. As her hand closed around the cool metal of her pre-packed bag's handle, Beatrice's performance began. A choked gasp, a hand fluttering dramatically to her chest, her carefully applied rouge momentarily standing out against a sudden, theatrical pallor. "Oh, my heart," she wheezed, her voice a reedy whisper that somehow still carried an incredible projection. "Arthur, darling, my pills, my cardiac medication." Arthur predictably sprang to attention, his placid face a mask of panicked confusion. "Evelyn, for God's sake, she's having an attack. Get her pills. Where are her pills?" He stammered, flailing towards his mother, utterly useless, his eyes wide and accusatory as they flicked to Evelyn. The very image of a man caught between two performances, perpetually unprepared for genuine crisis. Evelyn paused, one foot already across the threshold. The old Evelyn, the one trapped by obligation and a desperate need for peace, would have rushed back, would have scoured the house for some imaginary prescription, would have prolonged the torture. But that Evelyn was already a distant memory, a faint shadow on the polished mahogany floorboards she was now abandoning. She turned her head slightly, enough to meet Arthur's frantic gaze, then Beatrice's, whose eyes, despite the feigned distress, held a flicker of cunning, still trying to command the scene. "They're in her handbag," Evelyn said, her voice calm, utterly flat. "The one she's clutching to her chest. She put them there this morning, Arthur, just after she meticulously counted them." A beat of silence. "For dramatic effect, I presume." Then, without another glance, Evelyn Finch stepped out, closing the heavy oak door behind her with a soft thud that resonated like a definitive period at the end of a very long, very complicated sentence. The silence of the porch, the soft twilight air, felt like a lungful of pure, untainted oxygen after years of breathing stale, recycled air. The taxi was waiting, its yellow gleam a startling contrast to the muted grandeur of her old life. She slid into the back, giving the driver the address. The car pulled away, and Evelyn watched her former house shrink in the rearview mirror, a grand mausoleum of her suffocated self. There was no triumph, no wild exultation, just a quiet, profound hum of relief, a sense of rightness, and an entirely new, terrifying, exhilarating blankness. Her new apartment building was modest, brick-faced, nestled comfortably amongst a row of similar structures on a bustling street. It hummed with the quiet energy of independent lives, a stark contrast to the sprawling, silent mausoleum she'd just left. The hallways smelled faintly of curry and old wood, not the antiseptic polish of her former life. When she unlocked the door to Unit 3B, the scent that greeted her was of fresh paint and possibility. The apartment was small, gloriously, unapologetically small. A single, spacious main room for living and sleeping, a compact kitchen tucked into an alcove, and a surprisingly ample bathroom. White walls, pristine floorboards, a single large window looking out onto a narrow, tree-lined side street. It was a blank canvas, and for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn felt a thrilling, dizzying sense of genuine ownership. This was hers. No one else's preferences to consider, no passive-aggressive judgments to parry. The initial exhilaration, however, quickly gave way to the daunting reality of the blankness. Her single suitcase seemed pathetically small in the empty room. A folded cardboard box containing a few treasured books and her favorite ceramic mug sat forlornly in a corner. She was, quite literally, starting from scratch. And scratch, as it turned out, involved a lot of flat-pack furniture. The first box, labeled Mom Bed Frame, seemed a reasonable place to start. Evelyn, who had once prided herself on managing complex literary analyses and deflecting marital barbs, now faced a foe of an entirely different, equally frustrating, nature: Swedish instructional diagrams. The little stick figures, with their inscrutable smiles, mocked her from the glossy pamphlet. She spread a blanket on the floor, tipped out the contents, and was immediately overwhelmed by the sheer volume of anonymous wooden planks, metal brackets, and a bewildering assortment of screws and dowels. She found the Allen key, a tool she'd never had cause to use in her carefully curated existence, and eyed it with suspicion. "Right," she muttered to the empty room. "How hard can this be? It's just adult Lego." 3 hours later, Evelyn was covered in a fine sheen of sweat and sawdust. The Mom Bed Frame resembled a cubist art installation rather than a functional sleeping surface. She had somehow managed to attach a side rail to a headboard upside down, causing a cascade of small, metal connecting pegs to rain down like tiny, metallic insults. A crucial screw, labeled G, had disappeared into the abyss of the shag carpet she'd inherited, and a loose bolt rattled ominously from somewhere deep within the structure. She sat back on her heels, a stray lock of hair escaping her usually impeccable bun, her sharp tongue momentarily silenced by the sheer, infuriating illogic of flat-pack engineering. Her old life had been about elegant verbal constructions, about wielding words with precision. This new life, apparently, involved wrestling with obtuse pictograms and defying the laws of physics. She let out a laugh, a genuine, slightly hysterical sound that surprised even herself. It wasn't a sardonic smirk, but a raw, unfiltered burst of amusement at her own ineptitude. Just as she considered giving up and sleeping on the floor, there was a robust knock on her door. It was Brenda, a bottle of unapologetically cheap Risée swinging from one hand, a plastic bag clutched in the other. Brenda, with her riot of fiery red hair and a laugh that could shatter glass, had been the unexpected ally, the vibrant counterpoint to Evelyn's meticulously suppressed existence. "Well, hello, sleeping beauty," Brenda boomed, taking in the chaotic scene. "Looks like a bomb went off in here, or rather an IKEA flat pack exploded." She chuckled, stepping over a wayward plank. "Here, I brought provisions, and wine, essential for navigating the existential dread of self-assembly." Evelyn, still on the floor, offered a weak, grateful smile. "Brenda, you're a vision, or perhaps a mirage, I'm not sure which. My brain feels like it's been put through a cheese grater." Brenda plopped down unceremoniously on the blanket next to Evelyn, uncorking the wine with a practiced ease. "Never fear, reinforcements have arrived. What are we battling tonight? The Swedish Sphinx of sleep." She surveyed Evelyn's mangled creation. "Ah, yes, the mom, known for driving even the most stoic Swedes to therapy." They shared the wine directly from the bottle, along with a lukewarm takeaway pizza Brenda had rescued from near-certain disaster in her bag. Evelyn recounted the dramatic exit, the feigned heart attack, Beatrice's pill charade. Brenda listened, nodding, her expressions ranging from appalled to roaring with laughter. "Good riddance to bad rubbish, darling," Brenda declared, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. That woman was a masterclass in emotional terrorism, And Arthur, well, Arthur was just the turnstile operator. Evelyn sighed, taking another long swig of wine. I know, it sounds dreadful to say, but for years I just let them exist. I thought my sharp tongue was protecting me, but it was just a flimsy shield. I never actually did anything. Brenda nudged her. Doing nothing is a strategy too, but now you're doing something, you're doing this. She gestured around the chaotic, yet undeniably vibrant apartment. This isn't a prison, Evelyn. It's a construction site. And you, my dear, are the architect, the foreman, and the chief demolition expert all rolled into one. And if you ask me, you're doing a bloody brilliant job. For the first time since that devastating dinner party, Evelyn laughed, a deep, genuine belly laugh that rattled the flimsy particle board of her half-assembled bed. It felt liberating, like shedding a skin she hadn't realized she was still wearing. They talked for hours, not just about the past, but about the future, Brenda's plans for a community theater group, Evelyn's burgeoning ideas for her English classes, the sheer, unadulterated joy of making their own choices, however small. The next morning, the lingering effects of cheap retort and the daunting sight of the half-built bed were quickly overshadowed by a new crisis. The showerhead in her tiny bathroom was dripping. Not a gentle drip, but a persistent, irritating plink-plink-plink that threatened to erode her newfound tranquility. Evelyn, who had a vague understanding that plumbing involved pipes and water, but absolutely no idea how to make it stop dripping, felt a familiar wave of helplessness. She tried tightening the showerhead, a futile gesture that only made her knuckles ache. She tried jiggling the tap. Nothing. With a sigh of defeat, she remembered Brenda mentioning a handywoman in the building, a no-nonsense Mary Stone on the ground floor. Swallowing her pride, Evelyn put on a brave face and headed downstairs. The door to apartment 1A was solid oak, adorned with a simple brass knocker. Evelyn rapped lightly. A moment later, it was opened by a woman who looked as though she'd been carved from granite. Mary Stone was, indeed, no nonsense. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to take in Evelyn's entire life story in a single, unimpressed glance. She wore a practical denim jumpsuit, stained with what looked suspiciously like grease. You're the new one, 3B, right? Mary's voice was gruff, like sandpaper against wood. Evelyn nodded, feeling her carefully rehearsed explanation falter. Yes, Evelyn Finch. I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but I seem to have a rather persistent issue with my showerhead. Brenda mentioned you might be able to offer some advice. Mary grunted. Dripping, is it? Always the bloody dripping. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. You try tightening it. Yes, and jiggling, Evelyn admitted, feeling foolish. Mary just sighed, a sound of profound world-weariness. Right, give me 5 minutes, don't touch anything. She disappeared back into her apartment, emerging shortly after with a small, battered toolbox that looked like it had seen several wars. Back in Evelyn's bathroom, Mary surveyed the offending showerhead with the air of a seasoned detective. She pulled a worn leather pouch from her toolbox, extracted a wrench, and with 2 swift, decisive turns, the plink-plink-plink ceased. Just like that. Evelyn stared, dumbfounded. Oh, my goodness, that was remarkably efficient. Mary grunted, packing away her wrench. Most things are, if you know which way to turn. A lot of people spend their lives turning the wrong way, making things worse. She fixed Evelyn with her steely gaze. You got a plunger. Evelyn blinked. A plunger. For the toilet, drains, essential equipment. If you don't got one, get one. Don't rely on a neighbor for every little thing. Mary gestured with a greasy thumb towards the shower. Next time it'll be a washer, you'll need a screwdriver, crosshead. Evelyn felt a flash of her old wit surge. I'm afraid my previous life was more about the cross-examination than the crosshead, Ms. Stone. A faint flicker, almost a smile, played on Mary's lips. Well, you're in a new life now, aren't you? Best learn the right tools for it. With another grunt, she turned and left, leaving Evelyn standing in a suddenly silent bathroom, clutching her unplunged pride. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself at the large, sun-drenched window, looking out at the street below. Her apartment was still sparsely furnished, but the quiet hum of the building, the distant city sounds, felt less isolating than the echoing silence of her old mansion. She saw a woman with vibrant, artistic scarves tied in her hair, carrying a canvas bag filled with sketching pencils, enter the building. Jeanette Bloom, the children's book illustrator from 4C, Evelyn recalled Brenda mentioning. Ms. Bloom paused in the hallway below, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to the building's subtle symphony. Her eyes, gentle and observant, drifted up, meeting Evelyn's gaze for a fleeting moment. A small, serene smile touched Ms. Bloom's lips, a silent acknowledgement before she disappeared from view. Evelyn found herself smiling back at the empty window pane. The smile felt softer than she was used to, less practiced. She had a plunger to buy, and a bed to finish assembling. The prospect was still daunting, but it no longer felt insurmountable. She had silenced a dripping faucet, laughed until her sides ached, and met a woman who measured life by the right turn of a wrench. It wasn't the pristine perfection she'd once strived for, but it was real. And for Evelyn Finch, the sharp tongue, this was just the first flight of a far more exhilarating journey. Tomorrow, she would tackle the dresser. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would even attempt to find the elusive screw, G. The raw planks of pine, still smelling faintly of sawdust and ambition, rested against the wall of Evelyn's tiny living room. A week ago, they'd been formless, part of a stack at the ingenious nook, a community workshop Jade Curley ran with the methodical precision of a master carpenter. Now, thanks to Evelyn's painstakingly newfound, and often frustrating DIY skills, they were destined to become a custom bookshelf, a testament to efficiency, and more importantly, her resourcefulness. She ran a hand over the smooth, sanded surface, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. The faint scar on her thumb, a souvenir from a particularly stubborn nail, was a badge of honor. Just a few short weeks ago, the idea of wielding a power drill would have been laughable, her pristine home a mausoleum of untouched surfaces and professional cleaning services. But this apartment, small and a little bruised from the chaotic assembly of IKEA furniture, was different. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. The sofa was still more functional than fashionable, the kitchen counters prone to crumbs, and the solitary orchid, a vibrant purple survivor of Beatrice's accidental aggression, thrived unapologetically on a sun-drenched windowsill. It was a home in progress, messy and alive, mirroring Evelyn herself. She thought of Jade Curley's calm, almost meditative focus as he demonstrated how to properly measure and cut. He was a man who found beauty in functionality, a philosophy Evelyn was slowly, awkwardly embracing. His pragmatic advice, measure twice, cut once, and always assume the wood will surprise you, had become a strange mantra. She made mistakes, a crooked cut here, a stripped screw there, but each imperfection was a lesson, each successful joint a tiny victory. The shelf, once completed, would hold her growing collection of books, not the classics she taught, but the eclectic mix Brenda kept pressing into her hands, and the thought-provoking title's introduction page recommended at the open page. Speaking of Brenda, it was her insistent text that next dragged Evelyn away from her burgeoning carpentry aspirations. Enough with the sawdust, Finch. Your new wardrobe calls. Meet me at the unboxed self in an hour. Don't be late, and for heaven's sake, wear something that hasn't seen the inside of a classroom since the 90s. Evelyn chuckled, a genuine, full sound that still surprised her sometimes. Her previous wardrobe had been a carefully curated collection of power suits and sensible skirts, designed for authority and invisibility. Her beige existence. The unboxed self, a veritable explosion of color and fabric housed in a converted warehouse, was the antithesis of all that. When she arrived, Brenda was already there, a riot of clashing patterns and an infectious grin, holding up a sequined jumpsuit. Evelyn, darling, just the thing for your inner disco queen. Lana DeSanto, the owner, emerged from behind a rack of vintage furs, a mischievous glint in her eye. Lana had an uncanny ability to distill a person's essence into a single, perfectly chosen, and often wildly inappropriate garment. Brenda, you're trying to turn our Evelyn into a glitter bomb. We're working on subtle subversion, aren't we, Evelyn? She winked. Evelyn, holding up a sleek, emerald green velvet dress, felt a thrill. Subtle subversion is my middle name, Lana, and I thought emerald would complement my newfound penchant for power tools. Lana laughed, a throaty, conspiratorial sound. Perfect. You're shedding the skin of Miss Finch, aren't you? The teacher, the wife, the ornament. Now you're just Evelyn. And Evelyn needs a dress that says, I'm here, I'm sharp, and I might just dismantle your expectations with a single glance. For the next hour, Evelyn tried on garments that she would have once deemed utterly scandalous. A flowing bohemian skirt, a structured blazer in an audacious fuchsia, a pair of artfully distressed jeans. She felt a lightness, a sense of playful rebellion she hadn't realized she'd suppressed. Lana's astute observations, delivered with a charmingly chaotic energy, were like a form of therapy. She challenged Evelyn to see herself not as she should be, but as she could be. She settled on a deep aubergine jumpsuit, sleek and sophisticated, but with a surprising, playful cutout at the back. It was elegant, daring, and felt utterly her. That's it, Lana declared, a triumph in her voice. The new you, unboxed, unburdened, and utterly unforgettable. The feeling of liberation carried over into her next outing, a logic puzzle competition at the Enigma Exchange. Brenda, predictably, was her partner. The cafe buzzed with the quiet intensity of focused minds, the click of game pieces, and the aroma of artisanal coffee. Evelyn felt her mind hum with a different kind of energy here, one that wasn't about parrying attacks, but about constructing solutions. They faced a complex spatial reasoning puzzle, a labyrinth of interconnected rooms and cryptic clues. Evelyn, with her razor-sharp analytical mind, found herself thriving. Her wit, usually deployed for rapid-fire comebacks, was now a scalpel of deduction, dissecting the puzzle's layers, identifying patterns, and anticipating outcomes. Brenda, with her intuitive leaps and fearless experimentation, was the perfect foil. They bickered good-naturedly, their contrasting styles complementing each other, until with a collective gasp and a triumphant slam of the final piece, they solved it. The small bell on the counter chimed, signifying their victory. Finch, you are a menace to all unsolved mysteries, Brenda declared, slapping her on the back. A beautiful, terrifying, puzzle-solving menace. Evelyn, flushed with the genuine satisfaction of intellectual victory, simply smiled. Her mind, once a cage of defensive thoughts, felt expansive, a playground for strategy and connection. The mental exhilaration of the Enigma Exchange also highlighted a lingering question: how to truly wield this sharpened intellect for constructive rather than purely reactive purposes. This led her to the Lexicon Lab, a bright, open studio run by Mark Word. Mark, with his incisive gaze and calm demeanor, was precisely the communication coach Evelyn needed. Your wit, Evelyn, Mark observed during their first session, tapping a pen against his notepad, is a formidable weapon. But it's been deployed like a broadsword in a skirmish, when what you truly possess is the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. We're going to retrain it, to build, not just to demolish. Evelyn found herself analyzing her old comebacks, dissecting their intent. She realized how often her sharp tongue had been a shield, a protective barrier against vulnerability. Mark challenged her with exercises in speaking truth without apology, focusing on clarity, intent, and authentic expression. He pushed her to identify the underlying emotion behind a caustic remark and find a more direct, yet still impactful, way to articulate it. It's not about losing the edge, Mark explained. It's about choosing where to apply it. Is it to wound or to illuminate, to defend or to connect? Evelyn learned to craft sentences that were precise, powerful, and devoid of the old bitterness. Her wit began to transform from a defensive parry into a tool for self-assertion and genuine communication. Yet all this intellectual and social engagement, while fulfilling, left Evelyn with a new kind of fatigue. The constant processing, the active rebuilding, stirred up old anxieties she hadn't fully acknowledged. Brenda, ever observant, suggested she visit the Still Point Studio, a tranquil space for mindfulness and contemplation run by Nathan Homan. Evelyn, initially skeptical, found herself drawn to the studio's quiet, clean scent of cedarwood and lavender. Nathan Homan, with his perceptive, non-judgmental presence, spoke in a low, calming voice about the importance of listening to one's internal narratives. Her first meditation session was a battle. Her mind, so accustomed to analysis and defense, resisted the stillness. Defensive chatter, old resentments, and the lingering echoes of Arthur's passive-aggressive sighs and Beatrice's manipulative purrs tried to resurface. But Nathan's gentle guidance brought her back, anchoring her to her breath, to the polished river stones arranged in a calming pattern on the floor. Slowly, painfully, Evelyn learned to sit with the discomfort, to observe her thoughts without judgment, and to let them pass. She discovered that beneath the sharp wit and the defensive armor, there was a quiet, authentic voice, a wellspring of inner peace she hadn't known existed. She wasn't just quieting the performance, she was cultivating a profound sense of self-worth from within. During her time with Nathan, Evelyn found herself reaching for books again, not as an escape, but as a source of deeper understanding. She gravitated towards introduction pages, the open page, finding solace in its intellectually stimulating yet calm atmosphere. Introduction, with his quiet wisdom and curated recommendations, became a silent anchor in her intellectual journey. "You're looking for clarity, aren't you?" he observed one afternoon, handing her a book on Stoic philosophy. "Not just in what you say, but in what you think." Evelyn nodded, appreciating his perceptiveness. They shared quiet conversations about literature, philosophy, and the intricate dance of human connection. It was a space where her mind was celebrated, her questions welcomed, and her evolving self gently affirmed. She felt truly seen, not as a performance, but as a complex, thinking individual. The transformation wasn't just mental or emotional, it became physical too. Brenda, spotting an Engard Academy flyer, had nudged her. "Fencing, Evelyn, all that precision, all that strategic thinking, you'd be a natural. Turn that sharp tongue into a sharp foil." Evelyn, surprisingly, agreed. The Engard Academy was a symphony of rhythmic footwork, the precise clang of steel and focused concentration. Her initial attempts were clumsy, her movements stiff, but her sharp mind quickly grasped the strategy, the angles, the deceptive parries, and the decisive thrusts. She learned to channel her one-sun-controlled aggression into disciplined, elegant movements. Her coach, a lean, formidable woman with eyes that missed nothing, once told her, "Your mind is faster than your blade, Evelyn. Train your body to keep up. Each lunge, each parry is a conversation, a very pointed one." Evelyn realized the parallels to her own life, transforming cutting remarks into the elegant art of the blade, finding strength and grace in every lunge, every well-aimed touch. She was not just a strategist, she was a warrior, embodying her liberation in precise, powerful action. One vibrant Saturday, May Joy, a whirlwind of creative energy and the community festival organizer, enlisted Evelyn and Brenda for a storytelling project at Spark, the local arts collective. May Joy had heard snippets of Evelyn's biting wit and saw not bitterness, but an untapped wellspring of narrative potential. "Evelyn, your observations are gold," May Joy exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "We're crafting stories about unexpected turns. Tell us about a moment where life threw you a curveball and you hit it out of the park, with wit, of course." Evelyn, initially hesitant to share, found herself recounting a hilariously understated anecdote about Beatrice's disastrous attempts to help her clean, reframing the torment into an absurd, comical tale. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't the bitter laughter of self-defense, but the joyful, connecting laughter of shared experience. She was using her wit to build bridges, to create something vibrant and communal, finding a new, exhilarating purpose for her sharp observations. Even with all this forward momentum, Evelyn knew there were parts of her past that needed integration, not just eradication. Brenda, again, had suggested Eve Weaver at Month, a unique studio above the open page dedicated to personal archiving and narrative weaving. Eve Weaver, with her gentle, intuitive presence, greeted Evelyn in a sun-drenched room filled with old journals and symbolic objects. "We're not rewriting history, Evelyn," Eve explained softly, gesturing to a large life timeline wall. "We're understanding how all your months, all your experiences, even the ones you wish to forget, weave together to create the magnificent tapestry that is you." Evelyn brought an old journal, a faded photograph of herself and Arthur from early in their marriage, and a meticulously drawn architectural sketch of her old, pristine kitchen. As she spoke, Eve helped her connect the dots. How her sharp wit became a shield in a joyless marriage, how Arthur's passive aggression and Beatrice's manipulation had systematically eroded her, and how her escape, though messy, was a testament to her inherent strength. She looked at the old sketch of her kitchen, now understanding it not as a symbol of control, but a space where her creativity was stifled. She placed the small wooden shelf she'd built at the ingenious nook onto the timeline, a tangible symbol of her new autonomy and resourcefulness. Eve helped her reframe her entire narrative, seeing the painful chapters not as failures, but as crucibles that forged her resilience. She embraced all of Evelyn, the sharp-tongued teacher, the stifled wife, and the emerging, vibrant, authentic woman. Back in her small apartment, the aubergine jumpsuit hung proudly beside the nascent bookshelf. A small, elegant pocket watch, meticulously restored by James Ponder from the Chronos workshop, ticked softly on her bedside table, a reminder that time once a burden was now hers to shape. The apartment, though still humble, hummed with a different energy. It reflected her, a little eclectic, still a work in progress, but entirely, vibrantly hers. The quiet hum of her newly reclaimed life was a symphony of self-discovery, each new connection, each learned skill, a note in her authentic composition. She was ready for anything, even the past. The end-of-year school assembly loomed, a final echo of her old life. She wondered if Maya would be there. Evelyn felt a new, quiet confidence settle within her, a calm that went deeper than any witty retort. She was no longer just preparing to survive, she was preparing to shine. The auditorium buzzed with the nervous energy of 1,000 fluttering hopes and anxieties, a symphony Evelyn Finch once thought she understood, contained, and expertly managed. But today, as she found her seat towards the back, near the aisle where escape would be swift if needed, the familiar thrum felt different. It was less a cage, more a choir, each voice distinct, vibrating with potential. Months had stretched since her walkout, since the final, liberating clink of the lock behind her, and with each passing day, the sterile perfection of her old life receded further into an almost unbelievable past. She wore a dress today, not one of the impeccably tailored suits Arthur had admired, but a deep emerald green, flowing and soft, found during a whimsical afternoon at the Unboxed Self with Lana. It allowed her to breathe, to simply be, without the rigid expectation of performance. Her sharp gaze, once a weapon, now held a softened warmth, an observational curiosity that didn't judge, but simply acknowledged. Around her, the faculty whispered, a gentle hum of end-of-year relief and the usual academic gossip. She saw Teacher Pendleton, prim and proper as ever, her gaze sweeping the room for any hint of disorder. Evelyn offered a small, genuine smile, no longer feeling the need to provoke or impress. Pendleton, surprisingly, offered a faint, almost shy nod in return, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, if unspoken, journey. Evelyn's attention drifted to the sea of graduates, their faces a kaleidoscope of youthful exuberance and trepidation. She remembered Maya, that quiet, brilliant girl, a ghost of her own past, so easily made small, so nearly lost. A pang of something akin to maternal pride, fierce and protective, settled in Evelyn's chest. Maya, she thought, had truly found her fire. The principal's droning introduction faded into polite applause, and then a figure stepped onto the stage. Maya. She moved with an easy grace Evelyn hadn't seen in her before, her shoulders back, her head held high. No longer shrinking, no longer camouflaged by oversized sweaters, Maya wore a simple, elegant navy dress, her dark hair pulled back, framing a face alight with intelligence and quiet determination. A ripple of recognition, then appreciative murmurs spread through the audience. Evelyn leaned forward, a prickle of anticipation tracing her spine. This wasn't just a speech. This was a manifestation. Maya adjusted the microphone, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good afternoon, Principal Davies, esteemed faculty, proud parents, and fellow graduates," she began, her voice clear and resonant, not the hesitant murmur Evelyn remembered. "We stand today at a precipice, looking out at the vast, uncharted territory of our futures. It's a daunting view, isn't it? Full of possibilities, but also full of unknowns. And sometimes, in those unknowns, we can feel very, very small." Evelyn felt a familiar echo in Maya's words, a faint ghost of her own past self, trapped in a gilded cage. But Maya was not speaking from a place of entrapment. She was speaking from a place of understanding, of having transcended that feeling. For a long time, Maya continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, I felt small, invisible. My voice felt like a whisper in a world that demanded shouts. I thought the safest thing was to simply not speak, to blend in, to let others define my boundaries, my worth, my future. And then I met a teacher who reminded me that my voice wasn't just my own, but a tool, a scalpel, a brush, a weapon if I needed it to be, but more importantly, a bridge. Evelyn's breath hitched. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a profound sense of validation unlike any professional accolade or witty triumph. This wasn't about cleverness or academic excellence. It was about genuine impact, about having truly seen someone and helped them find their own truth. This teacher, Maya's gaze seemed to find Evelyn in the back, holding it for a fleeting, powerful moment, taught me that true strength isn't in being the loudest, but in being the most authentic. She taught me that sometimes the sharpest wit isn't used to defend but to dissect, to expose pretense, to build understanding. She taught me not to be quiet, not to let anyone diminish the vast, complicated, brilliant landscape of my own mind. She taught me to embrace my sharp edges and to use them not to wound, but to carve out my own space in the world, to tell my own story, to speak my own truth without apology. A wave of applause, more robust and heartfelt than any previous, swept through the auditorium. Evelyn felt a tear prickle at the corner of her eye, a rare and startling sensation. Her old self would have recoiled from such sentiment, deflected it with a well-aimed barb. But her new self, the Evelyn forged in the crucible of her liberation, simply allowed it. She felt a deep, resonant joy, a fulfillment that stretched far beyond the confines of her old, performative life. Maya, this remarkable young woman, was her masterpiece, a living testament to the power of an unleashed voice. As Maya concluded her speech, graceful and self-possessed, the applause roared, a genuine tribute to her journey. Evelyn rose with the rest, clapping with sincere, unbridled pride. She saw Maya's eyes connect with hers once more, a shared secret, a silent promise. After the ceremony, the halls became a labyrinth of congratulatory hugs and excited chatter. Evelyn lingered, letting the crowd thin, planning to meet Brenda and Vera Croft for a celebratory lunch at the round table. She was about to slip out when a familiar, somewhat mournful voice stopped her. "Evelyn, is that really you?" She turned. Arthur. He looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. His impeccably pressed suit seemed to hang a little too loosely, his shoulders slumped. His usually carefully coiffed hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, betraying a deep weariness. The passive-aggressive sheen that had once been his armor seemed to have dulled, replaced by a bewildered fragility. "Arthur," Evelyn replied, her voice calm, devoid of the familiar sting she once would have employed. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement. He looked truly lost. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if expecting Beatrice to materialize and direct his movements. I saw Maya's speech. Very moving, good for her." He paused, clearly struggling for an opening. "Listen, Evelyn, it's been difficult since you left." Evelyn simply waited, her arms crossed, a patient observer. "Mother, she's not been herself," he continued, the words tumbling out, laced with a plea. "She doesn't quite understand, and the house, it's not the same, it's so empty. And the dust, Evelyn, you wouldn't believe the dust, and she keeps moving things, and I can never find anything. And the bills, it's just a mess, Evelyn, a real mess." He wrung his hands, a gesture so un-Arthur-like that Evelyn almost felt a flicker of something akin to pity. Almost. "And her pills," he lamented, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She still misplaces them, you know. Only now I can't find them either. It's a constant hunt. It's chaos. And she calls me incompetent." He shuddered, as if the word itself was a physical blow. Evelyn watched him, truly seeing him for the first time in years. Not the man she married, not the figurehead of her gilded cage, but a broken boy, utterly dependent, drowning in the chaos he'd always subtly encouraged. The manipulator had become the victim of his own manipulation, tangled in Beatrice's web without Evelyn there to absorb the blows. There was no joy in this realization, only a quiet, almost clinical understanding. "I tried to talk to her," Arthur continued, desperate, "but she just started crying, said I was neglecting her, said you were the only one who truly understood how to run things." Evelyn, please, it's not working, none of it. You were always so capable, so sharp. You knew how to manage everything. The house, mother, me. His eyes met hers, a naked plea in them. We need you, Evelyn, I need you. He hadn't changed. He still saw her as a fixer, a manager, a shield, an object to restore his comfort. He still wanted her to perform the role he had assigned her. The bitter edge, the subtle passive aggression, had been stripped away by necessity, revealing only a hollow dependence. Evelyn took a deep breath, the subtle scent of fresh-cut flowers from a nearby bouquet filling her lungs. Her gaze hardened, but her voice remained level, compassionate in its directness. Arthur, she said, her words like individual chimes, clear and resonant in the bustling hall. You're right, I was very capable. I managed everything. I ran the house, navigated your mother's theatrics, and buffered you from a life you refused to engage with. And in doing so, I stopped living my own. He flinched, but she pressed on, a surgeon making a clean, necessary incision. You don't need me, Arthur. You need to grow up. You need to learn how to manage your own life, your own mother, your own dust. The chaos you're experiencing now, it's not because I'm gone. It's because you never learned to take responsibility for your own domain. He looked at her, his mouth slightly agape, clearly not expecting this unvarnished truth. The old Evelyn would have wrapped it in layers of sarcasm, making him laugh uncomfortably. The new Evelyn delivered it with the calm force of a natural law. Then you'd better learn to clean, Arthur, she concluded, her voice gentle but utterly final. With that, Evelyn turned. She didn't look back. She walked out of the school, out of the echoes of her old professional life, and into the brilliant afternoon sunlight, leaving Arthur to grapple with the dust and his mother's misplaced pills. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a burst of laughter greeted her. There, waiting beneath a blossoming cherry tree, were Brenda, vibrant in a flowing scarf, and Vera Croft, her face radiating a quiet, nurturing warmth. Brenda waved enthusiastically. Evelyn, there you are. We were just about to send a search party equipped with emergency gin, Brenda declared, her eyes sparkling. Vera smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips. Maya's speech was wonderful, wasn't it? She's truly found her wings. Evelyn felt the genuine warmth of their presence wash over her, a stark contrast to the hollow interaction she'd just left. She certainly has, Evelyn said, her smile genuine, reaching her eyes. And I think I just helped Arthur find his broom. Brenda burst into a delighted shriek of laughter, slapping her thigh. Oh, Evelyn, you're marvelous. Come on, let's get you fed. Vera made a special lemon cake. The three of them walked arm in arm down the street, their chatter light and easy, a symphony of authentic connection. They passed the open page, where introduction page, ever observant, offered a quiet, approving nod from the doorway. Evelyn smiled back, feeling seen, truly seen, without needing to perform. That evening, the air in the unscripted stage hummed with anticipation, thick with the scent of craft beer and brewing coffee. The mismatched chairs were packed, faces illuminated by the soft glow of fairy lights and the single spotlight on the small, worn stage. Evelyn, feeling a delicious flutter of nerves and exhilaration, watched the performance before her, a young poet pouring out his soul, raw and vulnerable. It was a space where authenticity wasn't just tolerated, it was revered. Lana DeSanto, perched on a stool beside the small bar, winked at Evelyn. You're up next, Nightingale. Give him hell. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the shift within her. No longer an armor, her wit was now a finely tuned instrument, eager to play. She took the stage, the spotlight warm on her face, and for a moment simply looked out at the faces, Brenda, laughing with Vera in the front row, Maya tucked into a quiet corner, eyes bright with admiration, even Mary Stone in the very back, a rare, almost imperceptible curve to her lips. She didn't need to be afraid. She wasn't deflecting, she was sharing. Good evening, fellow truth seekers, Evelyn began, her voice steady, a mischievous glint in her eye. For years, I believed my sharp tongue was a gift, a shield, a weapon. Turns out it was mostly just a very elaborate, very expensive, and utterly exhausting smoke machine. Laughter rippled through the room. Evelyn paused, letting it settle, enjoying the connection. I used it to obscure a truth I couldn't bear to face, that I was living a life meticulously crafted by someone else's expectations, and slowly, surely, suffocating under the weight of my own silence. I parried, I jabbed, I delivered perfectly timed zingers, all to avoid saying what I really meant, what I really felt, what I really was. She paced the small stage, the rhythm of her words building. And then the smoke cleared. Or rather, a particularly tenacious, manipulative octogenarian with a penchant for orchids and passive-aggressive pot roasts decided to blow it all away for me. More laughter, louder this time, understanding in its depths. And my husband, bless his utterly bewildered heart, was her most devoted audience member. A beat of perfect comedic timing. Turns out, when you finally stop trying to impress the audience that never truly saw you, you find a whole new theater. A theater where the applause is real, the laughter is genuine, and the only script you need is the one you write yourself, with all its messy, glorious, unedited truths. She smiled, a broad, radiant smile that reached every corner of the room. So, tonight, I'm not here to hide. I'm not here to defend. I'm here to tell you that sometimes the greatest art isn't in perfecting the performance, but in embracing the beautiful, terrifying, liberating chaos of the unscripted. It's in the quiet hum of your own authentic symphony, played not to impress, but to truly connect. Collective sigh, then a thunderous applause. Evelyn stood there, bathed in the spotlight, and for the first time in her life she felt truly, completely, unreservedly free. She felt the joy bubble up from deep within, an uninhibited, hearty laugh that escaped her lips and joined the chorus of applause. The sharp tongue had awakened, not as a weapon of defense, but as a conductor of an authentic symphony, orchestrating a life rich with genuine connection, fiercely independent, and utterly, wonderfully her own. The music had just begun.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button to like it. And please do subscribe to support the channel.